Hey, welcome to Socialism for All. Today's date is November 9, 2023, and we're recording another office hours stream here at twitch.tv/socialism S4A, where I am joined in the chat by 44 viewers right now. Welcome to everybody, first timers and longtime regulars alike. The people in the chat help to make this stream what it is. I could just sit here and talk the whole time, but that would be some kind of interesting, but it gets a lot richer with people asking questions and offering their experiences and other things into the chat, which ends up being like probably 2/3 of what you actually hear on the stream is community content. So really appreciate that a lot. And speaking of community content as well, I want to thank the folks who are helping to enable this show by being Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee supporters. So patreon.com/socialismforall and buymeacoffee.com/socialismforall are places where you can sign up to either do a one-time donation on Buy Me a Coffee or a recurring donation on either Buy Me a Coffee or Patreon. And folks whose this isn't up to date. The ones that I uploaded in the audiobooks, I think I grabbed the wrong graphic before I started streaming. Anyway, there's a couple of people who've signed up since this graphic. I want to thank Kevin Kirby for a very large donation recently. So that'll be reflected in the audiobooks. But appreciate everybody who does support the channel. I would make some kind of content even if nobody supported, but I wouldn't be able to spend this much time on it without that financial support, which lets me restrict my wage work pursuits and to a certain amount, and then I'm able to just budget a certain amount of time for this. Names in blue have been supporting over 3 years, names in green over 2 years, names in yellow more than 1 year. So a lot of long-term support. I really appreciate the community. Some of you I do interact with in the comments and the DMs more. Some of you are more silent supporters. Either way, I appreciate it a lot. And, remember to like, share, subscribe as well to help boost it. It's this community that really helps to make it what it is. I started out wanting to just do some more reading, and I had some things to rant about, and that's how we started out in the first year. Now, over 3.5 years later, we're coming up on 4 years actually in February. I think the channel has grown a lot. My understanding of the international communist movement and its history have grown a lot. I know a lot of you have been along on this ride with me pretty much since the beginning. Others, from the first, second year, third year, whatever. We've come a long way. There's a lot of, I think, ignorance to be overcome, including, in myself, and it's all about learning. It's all about, to me, doing the kind of mass public-facing education that can get the left in general up to a point where it's actually aware of the history and the theory and what capitalism is and what has worked against it and what hasn't worked against capitalism, what kinds of ideological, what kinds of organizational, what kind of strategic and tactical moves have been taken against capital, and, how did that play out? And anyway, it's been a great educational journey so far. I think that, you see a lot of opportunism in a party like CPUSA, for example. The Communist Party of the United States right now is how it presents itself. But I think as the movement in general, as the left in general, comes more up to speed on, reading a lot more Marx, Engels, Lenin, Stalin, and, all of the other kind of classic contributions to theory, I think that we will overcome a lot of the errors going on now. I know that for myself, things are a lot more clear as far as what has and what hasn't worked in history and what could work again today, and so on. But anyway, thanks to the patrons and Buy Me a Coffee supporters, who we don't have a special name for yet. Tried out a few terrible things, but I think buymeacoffee.com supporters is just fine for now. All right, 47 people in the chat. Trying to think if there's anything off the top of my head that I want to kind of monologue about for a minute. As I was just telling the chat, we have a few scraps of news. Israel is bombing areas in the West Bank again, conducting, quote, counter-terror operations, but they are bombing camps and different things in like drone strikes. So that just started kind of right before I came on stream. I don't have a lot of details yet. But yeah, Israel had also attacked targets in the West Bank. This is occupied territory. They were attacking targets about 4 months ago. So this is resuming that. And I don't know, exactly how extensive it's going to be. I understand that there's areas now in the West Bank without electricity and water and things. So it's not under the kind of total siege that Gaza is, but there's violence going on there as well. I mean, there's obviously the long-term protracted violence just of the fact that it is occupied and et cetera, but there's sort of active, gunfire going on and things now. All right. Otherwise, want to mention, again, like a couple hours ago, Jill Stein just announced she's running for the Green Party again in 2024. I really don't like Jill Stein. I think she's from more of the kind of grifter opportunist wing of the Greens, which unfortunately I think is probably the dominant wing of the Greens, unfortunately. There is more of a left eco-socialist wing of the Greens as well. I'm definitely more supportive of that. But Jill Stein, it's like she's a doctor, Harvard educated, stuff like that. Not that these things in themselves are necessarily awful. The point is more, who do you want running your left? Who do you want as the political leaders of the left? You want people who've actually led struggle, who are labor leaders and stuff like that. The kind of just, maybe they wrote a book or something like media gadflies. One of the things we're kind of criticizing about Cornel West before, in addition to Cornel West's somewhat awful politics and statements like Ronald Reagan was a freedom fighter against vicious forms of communism. It's an actual statement of his from like 10 years ago, not like recent past. Yeah, Jill Stein, just not the candidate I think that the U.S. left needs. Also, she's such a kind of easy target, I think, for the sort of mainstream imperialist media. And I don't know that she does that well as far as the media stuff, and just kind of gives people looking for an excuse to blame the Greens for all of the failures of imperialism. The Democrats and the Republicans the Democrats try to pretend that they're some friend of the working class or whatever. They've been in power since 1828. The system belongs to them as much as it belongs to anyone else. And they are owned by the 1%. They work for capital. Everything else flows from that. That is like the main thing determining their behavior is they're owned by the medical industrial complex and the real estate developers and all of the other fucking scumbags that, run this late stage horrible capitalism that is exploiting and oppressing everybody so badly, both in the U.S. and around the world. The Democrats are no friend of, either the domestic proletariat or the international, oppressed peoples of the world. And yet they want to make it out that like things would be fine. It's just, the scary Republicans, and once in a while the Greens put up a candidate that, quote, throws the election or spoils the election. That's a bunch of horse shit. And most of the people who vote Green or PSL or whatever other left party runs candidates in the presidential elections were never going to vote for Democrats anyway. All of that spoiler stuff is just covering for the Democrats' deep unpopularity and failure to do, anything really significant on a consistent basis for working class people that, remotely keeps up with the challenges that working people are facing. For example, we're in, Israel's conducting a genocide in Gaza right now. Genocide Joe Biden is just going right along with that. The entire mechanism of the Democratic Party is basically behind that. You got a few people like Rashida Tlaib, Palestinian American in Congress, who, is a shitty liberal in most respects, but did speak up against that and got censured for it. These are the moves of a fascist country. The U.S. is a fascist country, fascism being the ideology of imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, advanced monopoly capitalism of the type that we have been in for like a century or so. So yeah, that's what you expect from an imperialist party like the Democratic Party. And, people thinking that party is going to change. Again, they've been around forever. They're not going to change. They're owned by the 1%. They're owned by basically the same people, the same industries that donate to the Republican Party. You can check this on opensecrets.org. There are some differences, but where it matters, it's 70-80% like identical. So yeah, capitalists, those are their two parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, and those are the overall determining factors of economic life. But in addition to what's going on with the Israel-Palestine thing, we got a massive engineered housing crisis going on right now that is going to result in a gigantic crash, which is actually the price decline recently peaked. It's starting to come down. We've discussed this a few times on the West Coast, Southwest, Texas, up into parts of the Southeast, like portions of Florida, up into like Nashville and other places in the, not quite the Southeast, but sort of that mid-Atlantic region. There's other areas of the country where it hasn't started to have the downturn yet. Like the Northeast is pretty much untouched up into the upper Midwest and like Great Lakes region. Price is not coming down there yet really, but it will spread. Recessions don't always hit the entire country all at once. And actually along those lines, what we see from the Federal Reserve, which this year, they've been trying to do quantitative tightening since 2022 to get stuff off of their balance sheet. And there's so much free money that was put out into the economy since 2008. It's how they kept things going. Low interest rates, just handing out money, lending. Well, drove prices way, way up. A lot of people, getting basically like 3% mortgages, buying houses as investment opportunities rather than putting their money in the stock market. Well, here's the thing. You can't live in a stock, but you can live in a house. In fact, you need to live in a house or apartment building or something like that. And when the money goes out of the stocks and goes into houses as just investment properties, you wind up with a housing crisis. And right now there's very little inventory on the market. But again, in about half the U.S., starting to decline as a result of the rate hikes, as they do the quantitative tightening, getting the money back out of the system. The problem is they tried to do some tightening in 2018, and in 2019, the repo market broke, repo madness. Then the pandemic happens. They double the amount of money in the system. Okay, 2022, they try to do tightening again, and you get Signature and SVB breaking. They have to get bailed out, which basically reverses the tightening as they put those assets onto the Fed balance sheet. Okay, well, now they're doing more aggressive tightening with these rate hikes, except here's what happens. There's a lot of people who think delusionally, a lot of people who participate in capitalism as capitalists, as investors, don't actually understand how the system works. They have this magical, deluded belief that just prices will stay high forever. No, what goes up must come down in capitalism, always. This is how it goes. There's a boom-bust cycle. Right now, we're in the biggest bubble. That's a period of extensive overvaluation, even surpassing the bubble of 06-07, which resulted in that 08 crash. So we're in that kind of situation now. They're doing the tightening, they're raising the rates, and the markets right now are predicting that the Fed is going to start cutting rates around basically mid-spring, May 2024. And so some people are thinking, oh, then things will, quote, go back to normal and we can resume all this frenetic investment activity. Well, no. Historically, what happens is when they start cutting the rates, it's because there's a delayed effect, there's a lag. The rates stay high for a while. That lights the fuse, basically. But don't confuse them blowing out the match that lit the fuse, which is when they start to cut the rates, with the explosive event attached to the other end of that fuse. Basically, they don't need to keep the match burning because the fuse is already going. Okay, so they blow it out, they start cutting rates. That's expected to happen mid-spring, so about 6 months from now. What that means is that that's when you can expect the big slide to start beginning, because that's what always happens. It's when the Fed starts cutting rates that the crash happens. So that's the situation we're in, and even corrected for inflation right now, it's a bigger bubble than the 05, 06, 07 that resulted in the GFC, the global financial crisis, the great financial crisis, whatever. Where we're going to be at that point, there will be some positive things, like the housing market may resume some normal activity. Rents right now at record highs, about $2,000 a month, according to Rent.com, on average across the country. Housing market, again, has slowed to a stop with, in many counties in the U.S., there's like less than a dozen properties for sale. This is historic lows. If you compare it to pre-pandemic activity, it's at like a third, maybe 2/5 of what it was at before the pandemic, and way below the long-term average as well. So we're in kind of crazy times. Democratic Party not saying a fucking word about any of this. I've never heard them really talk about this at all, not even just in a meaningful way, but just at all. They're not talking about the fact we have another time bomb of, currently a homelessness crisis, which is caused by the housing crisis. Homelessness is a lack of housing. It's not a permanent failure. It's a lack of affordable housing. It's a lack of housing people can actually pay for, and can actually keep and afford. Okay, that's what causes homelessness. It's not drug abuse. It's not, again, personal failings of any kind. It's a lack of affordable housing. That's what it is. And so you've got investors that have created this scenario of basically engineering a housing crisis by treating housing not as a place that people need to live with a fixed amount of inventory in existence at any given point, but as something to sort of just, treat as a bank and an investment opportunity. Hope all of these people suffer gut-wrenching losses in the coming crash, and really will be, happy to see that. I mean, it will be not really enough to make up for what people have been through, but yeah. So that's your Democratic Party. Massive, massive crises that they just sit back and do nothing about. Why? Because it's good cop, bad cop. Democrats, obviously the good cop, they're a little nicer to you. They give you a cup of water. The bad cop then, once in a while, interrupts the flow, gets in your face, scares you, roughs you up. Then the good cop comes back, oh, I'm so sorry about my partner. But they're both there for the same reason. They're there to bust you, and that's what this is about. They both work for the same people. All right, anyway, enough about that. So Jill Stein running. Joe Manchin has also announced that he is not running for re-election. So it turns out all those concessions that the Democratic Party needed to make to Joe Manchin, all of these horrible right-wing concessions that they needed to make, are really for nothing because he's leaving anyway. So, yeah. Also, there was a thing that I posted in the YouTube community posts tab about Algeria. So there was, unfortunately, a bit of fake news that was being circulated by MSN and the Hindustan Times, like some kind of larger names, but it even wound up on the MSN news kind of thing where they share articles from things, that the Algerian parliament had voted to enter the conflict in Gaza. Sounded, too good to be true, or at least outlandish. And turns out, that was not actually accurate. There was a commenter who said they were Algerian, and actually the parliament had, been very critical of Israel. They had not actually voted to do that. So I retracted that post and then addressing it here just so people know that was retracted there. Also, right now, today is a National Day of Action, November 9. Shut it down, the number 4 Palestine.org or .com. I did a post about this a couple days ago, but shut it down for Palestine. That's happening today. They're calling for people to do walkouts or demonstrations, to have a picket line outside of politicians' offices or Israeli businesses in other countries and whatever else. There's a whole list of stuff that could be done, even just wearing a black armband for the day or wearing other articles of clothing that indicate solidarity with Palestine. So Status Quo is actually covering right now, I retweeted it on Twitter, that there was a big walkout in New York City. There's actions actually going on across the country today. Again, shut it down for Palestine. That is the name of today's National Day of Action. All right, those are most of the notes that I had off the bat here. Let's go up into the chat, see what has been going on. I want to thank our moderators for being here to help keep things moderate. And just a reminder again for anybody who came in late, don't feed the trolls. It's one thing to have a somewhat adversarial comment from like a SOCDEM or something, but people are just trying to disrupt the chat. That's another story. So anyway, oh, and I also had a whisper here from somebody asking if they could come in and talk about real estate. They're like, can I talk about real estate? And I said, well, we talk about the coming housing and general economic crash sometimes. They said, okay, I just don't want to get booted. Are there certain things about real estate that are taboo or not allowed to be said? I don't know what you're talking. I mean, like what? I asked them, like, what did you want to say? And they're not being very specific. So I don't know. Help me help you there. All right, what else? Looking for some comments. Can you expand on the YouTube post you made about Marxism being or involving a transition from religion to philosophy, or however eloquently you put that, the other day? So that's actually from Marx's Introduction to a Critique of Hegel's Philosophy of Right, sometimes translated as Philosophy of Law. Yeah, so that's the source of the opium of the masses quote, or opium of the people. And basically Marx, it's also the source of the quote that kind of religious apologists sometimes say, well, Marx said that religion is the sigh of the oppressed and the heart of a heartless world. Yeah, but that is actually a passing mention. It is one line in a half an hour long essay, if you read it out loud, which starts by saying that the criticism of religion is the prerequisite of all criticism. In other words, if you want to do any meaningful social criticism, it begins with the criticism of religion. Okay, so that's the beginning of the essay, and then it concludes, the conclusion of the piece is that there needs to be a revolution within the proletarian heart, if you will, in order to do the kind of overhaul of society which will actually liberate the proletariat. Marx says that basically religion needs to be replaced with philosophy. So let me get you the exact quote there, but that is the gist of it. Loading it now. All right, scrolling down to the bottom. So yeah, as philosophy finds its material weapon in the proletariat, so the proletariat finds its spiritual weapon in philosophy. And once the lightning of thought has squarely struck this ingenuous soil of the people, that is, once philosophy has taken root in this soil of the people, the emancipation of, he was talking about Germany specifically there, but the emancipation of the Germans into men, that is like self-possessed, people who really are empowered, will be accomplished. Let us sum up the result. The only liberation of Germany, which is practically possible, is liberation that, in other words, if you're going to pull off some liberation that is not just some half-assed step toward another system of control and another system of alienation and everything else, the only liberation of Germany, which is practically possible, is liberation from the point of view of that theory which declares man to be the supreme being for man. So in other words, we're talking about recognizing material forces like human beings as actually being the ruling force in this world. Not gods, not immaterial factors, it's material forces such as human beings. So the only liberation which is practically possible is liberation from the point of view of the theory which declares man to be the supreme being for man. Germany can emancipate itself from the Middle Ages only if it emancipates itself at the same time from the partial victories over the Middle Ages. So earlier in this piece, he's talking about the Reformation and other changes in religion which are partial victories over the Middle Ages. So he's talking about finally doing a big push that gets rid of all of that. All right. Continuing, in Germany, no form of bondage can be broken without breaking all forms of bondage. So he's saying this has to be a thoroughgoing, complete revolution. And so no form of bondage can be broken without breaking all forms of bondage. Germany, which is renowned for its thoroughness, cannot make a revolution unless it is a thorough one. The emancipation of the German is the emancipation of man. The head of this emancipation is philosophy, its heart, the proletariat. Philosophy cannot realize itself without the transcendence of the proletariat, and the proletariat cannot transcend itself without the realization, implementation, if you will, embodiment of philosophy. When all the inner conditions are met, the day of the German resurrection will be heralded by the crowing of the cock of Gaul, a reference to, republicanism, basically. So, again, this is a longer essay, but that's the concluding passage. And again, it opens with the line, "For Germany, the criticism of religion has been essentially completed." He's talking about within the sort of intelligentsia and philosophical sphere, but the criticism of religion has been essentially completed, and the criticism of religion is the prerequisite of all criticism. And so he makes some notes that religious suffering is an expression of real suffering. It's a protest against real suffering, but it's also an illusion, and it can't actually really get you anywhere. That's the whole point of this. So the fact that it doesn't really get you anywhere in the end, it just gets you these partial victories, is the reason for that concluding passage that we just read, that in the end it's got to be replaced with philosophy, and that is going to be the lightning bolt that carries the proletariat forward to breaking all the chains of bondage of all of the oppression and exploitation of all the foregoing phases of class society. All right, so hopefully that's helpful. Let's see. Yeah, and so we have an extensive, there's a playlist with 16 videos in it, Marxism and Religion, where we discuss the very staunchly atheist and materialist, anti-religious, views and reasons for that in Marx and Engels, some of which we just discussed, and then some of Lenin's, as well as there's some other authors in there, like Rosa Luxemburg is in the playlist, talking against clericalism, also Marx's son-in-law, Paul Lafargue, talking against clericalism, which clericalism refers kind of more specifically to the positions of power and privilege given to the church by the state. So in socialist society, which is secularized, the religious authorities are cut off from all public money and privileges, not necessarily eradicated off the bat, but definitely cut off, and it becomes a purely personal matter rather than having anything like, so in the United States, for example, like churches are tax exempt and things like that. And of course, in past centuries, the church had even more, much more extreme privileges. You want to get rid of all of that. People want to have a belief, that's between them and God, so to speak. But eventually, also, it's understood that at a minimum, as society progresses into a materialist socialist society, people and also the kind of suffering under the exploitation and oppression of class society that drives people's clinging to religion, and that kind of fear, the uncertainty, the doubt that drives people into embracing religion will be undone at the root level by the eradication of class society. Of course, revolutionary socialist societies have never gotten more than a few decades to date, into socialist construction. That said, socialist societies did make a huge dent in religiosity, superstition, ignorance, mysticism, idealism, and even today, countries that have suffered capitalist reversal and restoration still tend to be more secular, to not be driven by religion in the same way that pre-revolutionary capitalist societies are. It's just religion tends to get cut down a lot, and that is for the benefit of everyone. You can see it like in the United States, areas that have higher religiosity tend to be more socially backward and have higher indicators of low social well-being in a number of things, whether it's like teenage pregnancies or literacy, all kinds of things. It's just people tend to be worse off. It correlates with higher religiosity. So while socialists can and should understand what religion is, study it scientifically. I'm not saying to go believe it. You shouldn't. In fact, I will say flat out, don't believe it, because part of when I talked about Lenin and the others writing against clericalism, Well, that's for the society as a whole. Within the party, it's kind of understood communists are atheists. That's just like flat out the understanding. And that the party should conduct atheist, scientific, materialist propaganda in society to try to pull people into more of a scientific, materialist outlook on life. That's just going to help your population, and it's going to help prevent people from getting dragged into backward reactionary thought. It's going to help them become more class conscious and stay more class conscious, etc. So yeah, I mean, the kind of position on religion for communists is, if you're a Marxist-Leninist, you're a scientific materialist. That's how that works. And the idea that immaterial gods are ruling the world, which is fundamentally, what religion is proposing, is directly counter to and incompatible with the idea that material forces drive history and society. So you can't accept both of those. You just simply cannot. But as far as analyzing religion, if you take a course on religion in college, say, you can study religion as a system of myths and as a system of traditions and as a system of organizing social behavior according to the needs of a feudal or a capitalist society, or even maybe a pre-feudal society. You can scientifically understand what the contents of a religion are without believing in it. And so, as people who are seeking social change and trying to act as change agents, yes, you should understand the cultural beliefs, traditions, and practices of, the cultural backgrounds, in other words, of populations that you're trying to have influence with, which is what we're definitely trying to do. Anybody talking about revolution, you're talking about massive social change. If you're trying to influence a population in any way, trying to put out propaganda and agitation, you have to understand where they're starting from. So to that extent, yeah, you can understand, as Marx acknowledged in passing, people are religious in part because they're afraid of the unknown and they're suffering in class society. But as communists, we don't want to pat them on the head for that. We want to pull them into a place where they're ready to fight for reality, to get beyond those illusions. As Marx says in that piece, we don't want to dispel the illusion of the flower on the chains that are keeping the slave in bondage just for the sake of being cruel. We want to do it so that the slave will stand up and, not being satisfied with that illusion, go and fight to, smell the real flower. So it's a fight against illusory happiness towards real power, real happiness. That's the whole thrust of it. So just simply, promoting religion as like a source of strength, that's one of the least Marxist things you can do. Religion, it should be understood, is a coping mechanism, but, as Marx understood, it will keep people back from doing the kind of completely thorough upheaval of society that communism is. Marx wrote that communism is the real movement which abolishes the present state of things. Okay? Also talked about ruthless criticism of all that exists, ruthless both in the sense of not being afraid of the results it arrives at, and in the sense of being just as little afraid of conflict with the powers that be. So for him, communism was this huge process of overturning everything that exists in class society. Actually, if you read the thing, I'll be putting it up on the channel shortly, but the source of the letter, it was a correspondence that Marx wrote, the ruthless criticism of all that exists, that line. He says elsewhere that communism is not to be reduced to the abolition of private property. That's a fundamental point, and as it says in the Communist Manifesto, that's like one of the most basic slogans. Why? It's because communism doesn't stop at that, but that is like the key thing holding people back from what Marx envisioned as communism, the state of liberated humanity, liberated from religious fetters, from private property, from all the things that were holding back the progressive forces within, human development possibilities. He held that private property was the main obstacle to that. That was kind of like the linchpin in capitalism of holding back progress and serving ultimately as a fetter. To a certain point, private property was a way that production could be built up. But then after a certain level, halfway through capitalism or wherever you want to draw the dividing line, capitalism's revolutionary and progressive role is exhausted. It's done all it can to bring humanity further. And then it is that private property system that is the main thing keeping people back from realizing the state of kind of limitless development and potential that Marx described as communism. So anyway, we'll be discussing that more when we do the correspondence with Ruga from 1843, where Marx uses the ruthless criticism thing. And then, as far as in the national and colonial questions, Lenin was also writing, and I want to thank a commenter for bringing this up. We have an audiobook on the channel of Lenin's draft theses on the national and colonial questions for the Second Congress of the Communist International. In that, he wrote about the need for struggle against the clergy and other influential reactionary and medieval elements in backward countries. This was to be the stance for the Comintern. And also the need to combat Pan-Islamism and similar trends, which strive to combine the liberation movement against European and American imperialism with an attempt to strengthen the positions of the khans, landowners, mullahs, etc. So these are not things to be readily embraced. If they wind up taking a role in the national liberation movement, that's something that communists trying to achieve the lead position within those national liberation movements need to try to keep in check. But ultimately, remember, the national bourgeoisie is going to be vacillating in its national liberation efforts because it's trying to take this middle ground that the bourgeoisie always tries to take. They are, quote, freedom fighters against feudalism and then in a national liberation struggle, whatever national oppression or imperialism that they're fighting. But they're not really unlimited freedom fighters in the way that communists are. We want freedom from everything. They just want enough freedom that they can set up capitalism, but then they don't want freedom, full freedom for the proletarians, which would mean socialism. So while those elements may be present and may make some contribution to a national liberation effort, Lenin said actually that we should struggle against them because they're going to combine the liberation movement with an attempt to strengthen the positions of the khans, landowners, mullahs, etc., reactionary elements. So this is to be understood, and it's not actually, I think, that hard to grasp, but there's some nuance to it that if you're brand new to this kind of thought, to Marxist anti-imperialism, the only real anti-imperialism actually, then it might be new to you, but that is a well-established position. All right. So yeah, this comes down to, there's another prominent YouTube channel, been doing this longer than I have, who now is on the Deprogram, popular podcast, Hakim, who kind of did a post the other day on Twitter that seemed to many, including me, to just be an endorsement of Islam. And again, it's one thing to try to understand a culture so that you can approach people from that background knowing where they're coming from. It's another thing to just be like, this is great and my favorite book, and it's a source of strength for people struggling and blah, blah, blah. That is not a Marxist position. That's not even close. So, I mean, I think I have it here. Let me put this on the screen for the sake of discussion. Because I guess it was getting shared in the, Deprogram. They have like a Discord and a Reddit and whatever. And people were talking about it. Just for the sake of this, let's actually read the post. I screenshotted it. So it's from a couple of days ago. So this is Hakim. How do the Palestinian people persist? They persist as Muslims through their unshakable faith, which drives their anti-colonial struggle. How materialist? People struggle because of ideas. Okay. Also, let's point out the founders of the PFLP, Marxist-Leninist Palestine Liberation Group, the head founder of the PFLP was actually from a Palestinian Christian background. Also, there was a splinter group, the DFLP, person who led that split also from a Palestinian Christian background. So there's definitely not exclusively Muslims in Palestine. So there's that. as Muslims through their unshakable faith, which drives their anti-colonial struggle. Is it that, or is it conditions which drives their struggle? If it wasn't for Islam, would they like seeing their children murdered, or like how does that work? I've gotten many messages asking on the topic, so I'm going to list a few reading recommendations. Okay, so the first recommendation, the religious text that informs their world outlook, the Quran. My favorite book, in fact. Okay, your favorite book is ancient mythology. All right. So Quran.com is an online resource where you can read and get info by each verse and chapter should you have a question. The study Quran is also very good and extensive. So I am not an expert on Islam through Marxist, through a Marxist perspective or lens. I have to think, though, if you have a communist audience and you're trying to encourage communists to understand the Quran and Muslim culture enough that you're able to more effectively agitate and, again, try to get the secular left up within the ranks of the national liberation movement and pick up some of where, when the USSR went down in the early 90s, the left wing of many national liberation movements kind of collapsed, and that's where you get more of these kind of right-wing fundamentalists taking over those coalitions, such as Hamas, and that seems to be like Israel's preferred enemy in this case. Not that they really want them to exist either, but if they have to fight one of them, that seems to be their chosen enemy. That's, again, not to say that they're working in Israel's interest. That's not the same thing. That would be a gross oversimplification. They're shooting at Israel. So it's not really in their interest. But between the secular left and them, they'd rather have that because, again, right-wing national bourgeoisie, religious fundamentalists, they're going to be more vacillating. And again, the way that the secular left lost relative power within that liberation coalition is kind of a whole other side story. But yeah, I've got to think that there are better resources out there than just read the Quran a whole lot. I mean, literally there probably are Marxist cliff notes on this subject, which would be a lot more relevant for communists than just, I love the Quran, you should love it too. I mean, he didn't literally say you should love it too, but it's like, Hakim gives reading recommendations a lot, and when you have the kind of fanboys that he does, understand that's the effect. So it's like, are we going to start seeing a sort of infracell type, the deprogram people fans starting to become converts now? We'll see. Next recommendation, Muhammad, His Life Based on the Earliest Sources, is a biography of the Prophet of Islam. So again, let's take a step back. Let's say you have hundreds of thousands of listeners, and you can recommend anything on this struggle for sort of cultural background and educating people about where the Palestinian resistance is coming from. Is this what you choose as a Marxist-Leninist? It definitely would not be what I would choose. I don't even know what to say. So anyway, a biography of the Prophet of Islam, his life and that of the early Muslims is reassuring, as the parallels between then and now are stark and impacting. What am I reading? If for nothing else, a fantastic historical work. It's your second recommendation in this list. Okay, now what's the third recommendation? Get ready. Apostate, From Christianity to Islam in Times of Secularization and Terror, is a relevant book from Joram van Klaveren, I think is how that would be pronounced. A far-right politician that aimed to write a book against Islam at first, but ended up questioning his presuppositions, or maybe we can rephrase that as found a way to make converting to Islam politically profitable, and converted. Wow. So turns out Joram van Klaveren is active on Twitter. He's active today. He just ran in an election in a right-wing party. This guy comes from where? Remember the UKIP party that was, remember the UKIP party in the UK, anti-immigrant, all of that stuff. Well, so there was like a Dutch party that also kind of mirrored that. And this guy, Geert Wilders, I guess the guy's name was. Yeah, so this guy was in that party. Okay, so that's who we're recommending. And he's still active as a fascist, writing articles about, how LGBTQ plus people shouldn't have civil rights and all this kind of stuff. That's who the number 3 recommendation is. A former far right. No, he's still far right. He just used to be far right and not Muslim. Now he's far right and Muslim. Okay. He continues. A great introductory work for those very unfamiliar with the Islamic world outlook, as he covers the usual misconceptions. You couldn't have found a better fucking recommendation than Joram van Klaveren? I'm sorry, but no. If interested, take a look to develop an understanding of the largest missing context to the belief and nature of the people currently resisting apartheid. Yeah, so end of thread. That's a bad list of recommendations right there, and I put this on a community post with just the word Marxism in quotes. Also, for all of the fanboys dropping in to be like, actually religion is good. I also wrote, Joram van Klaveren, really? Not a single one of you chuckle fucks looked up who that guy is. I don't know what they're doing over at the Deprogram. People have already, I don't listen to it. People tell me regularly how they're like rabidly Dungists at this point, deeply revisionist. Now they're kind of going down this road. I would cut the cord, man. I don't know where they're going. They got kicked off a Nebula recently. Yeah. But it's interesting because the audiobook that we just put up at S4A, Socialism and War, from Lenin and Zinoviev, 1915, talks about how he runs through the whole history of opportunism within the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party and how the opportunists kept destroying themselves. They kept showing back up again in some new kind of garb, but they kept destroying themselves. Whether they were the economists or whether they were the liquidationists or whatever form they took, they kept popping up, they kept destroying themselves, and that's always what happens. Study the stuff, and there's so many people coming in, whatever they're teaching you over there, it doesn't seem to be a very good quality. So you got to actually do the work, and we will get to a point at some point where we have actually decent parties again, and the left in general is just on firmer footing. We are not there yet, and you got these fucking goofballs, clowns, still misrepresenting. Somebody had it retweeted the Hakim thread with that scene from one of the Avengers movies where Thanos gets like one of the new stones and he's just like, reality is whatever I want it to be. They like crossed it. It was like, Marxism can be whatever I want it to be. That's how these people act. It can't be whatever you want it to be. You need to come in to learn and just not like impose whatever things that, there's something inconvenient in Marxism. You have to understand why it's there, not just like try to overwrite it. This is just so arrogant and it's so ignorant and makes me want to fucking puke. It's disgusting. All right. So yeah, I guess we did get into that a little bit. What else do we have? Well, we discussed Politsturm and their seemingly bad faith critique of my criticisms of them as well. I just want to say I was really mad on your behalf as I feel that they're misrepresenting you. So I don't have time to watch a 2-hour and 15-minute stream of Politsturm talking about how the ridiculous position that Palestine is an inter-imperialist struggle, kind of some kind of weird left-com position that they're taking on that. As a commenter said, how do you get China right and then Palestine wrong? It's like literally the easiest thing to get right. One of the most established questions out there. We've discussed this in the last couple of streams. Somebody told me that they were saying I was making emotional statements and was, quote, delusional. I mean, I guess, when people turn their backs on genocide, yeah, I guess I get a little emotional about that. But, trying to do this weird kind of quasi-ableist, like, I don't know what that is, emotional statements. Bro, you're claiming to be Marxist-Leninist and you're saying people shouldn't take sides between Israel and Palestine. They're killing babies over there. Like, I mean, this is a mass murder going on. Over 10,000 people killed, half of them children. and a very uncertain future. And you're telling people to like go hands off on that. Sorry, I don't know what that's about, but I'm kind of done with that at this point. So no, I think we're all set. All right, what else do we have going on? I guess on that same subject, I managed to get the Politsturm folks to acknowledge the contradiction between their arguments about why we shouldn't support the Palestinian struggle for liberation, but their support for the USSR in World War II, itself mostly an inter-imperialist conflict, and how the focus on defeating fascism was correct. Although Politsturm thinks that Palestinians should push for socialism before they resist fascist Israel. And you know what? Under different circumstances, that would be a correct position. The actual circumstances in Palestine right now are people are penned in to the most densely populated area on earth in Gaza. It's an open-air concentration camp, and Israel is raining bombs on them. Electricity, water, food, fuel are cut off. It's a genocide. Israel is announcing their intent to do ethnic cleansing. They're just not in a position right now where it's just survival is paramount at this point. Because, I mean, there have been decades and decades of struggle where the left did have a stronger position in the past within the Palestinian resistance. Unfortunately, there were shifts. The last significant one was 2006, 2007, where in Gaza, Hamas, in part through violence, forced Fatah into a secondary, more weak position. Fatah is still in control in the West Bank. And then there's various other groups and armed groups and different things involved in the resistance. But it is what it is right now. You know, Hamas fought its way to the head in part through dirty internal politics. But the resistance goes on from a really weakened position. So there's not this sort of endless time budget to just do internal politics. Sometimes it's go time, and you've just got to face an external enemy. This just basic shift in conditions. So I'm not saying that wouldn't be ideal. It would, but in the conditions that they're facing, where and how are they going to actually do that right now? If there was a way to actually do it, let's hear the plan. But that's not, it seems to me, what's going on in there at all. So anyway, they should wait to resist Israel. Israel's killing them now. You can't wait to dodge the bullet. Like if you catch that bullet, you're gone. That's how this is right now. And it's not an excuse. I really wish this wasn't the case. I'm not making excuses for any of the right-wing groups within that coalition. The PFLP, for example, considers neither Hamas nor Fatah valid because there haven't been elections in 15 years. Nevertheless, they're not just laying down and dying. It's just kind of crazy. But I agree. There's a major contradiction in that. All right. Had an interaction with someone trying to say that the USSR was never socialist, since Lenin used to describe himself as state capitalist. That's not really true. He said that when they had the revolution in the October Revolution, 1917, capitalism wasn't fully developed in Russia yet. So we've done audios on this very topic, where Lenin was talking about this. And so what Lenin described was that there was basically 5 pieces to the economy at that point. Socialist, different modes of production kind of coexisting in Russia. It's never just one or the other. So there were socialist elements to the economy. There were state capitalists, that is highly consolidated, regulated, accounted for pieces of the capitalist economy. There was private capitalist, petty bourgeois, and I forget what the last thing was, production. But yeah, so there was a bunch of different types of production going on at once. And what Lenin was saying was that state capitalism was the closest thing to socialism. So if they could build up that, it would be, or if they could kind of consolidate the other existing modes of production, eradicate the more petty bourgeois things, which they partly did through the cooperatives and things. And, basically herd all of the existing capitalist production into state capitalism. That would be the easiest way, they would run that for some period of time, and then they would, continue to collectivize and socialize from there. Which, in fact, Stalin did press ahead with that. It wasn't very long that they ran on that. So, no, these people have heard half of something somewhere. And if somebody, the name of the relevant pieces are not coming to me off the top of my head, but if somebody has the names of those pieces, I know we have the audiobooks for them on the channel if you want to find the quotes. But, yeah, that's not really what Lenin said. But, again, you do have to understand historical development, that the economy and the modes of production are not static. They're processes that are determined by historical conditions, and they're constantly, on an ongoing basis, shaped by class struggle. So they're always changing. One class pushes forward, the other class that's benefiting pushes back, trying to keep it where it is, and so on. So if you don't understand that, then yeah, it probably is confusing. But if you do understand it, again, it brings a lot of clarity. Okay. Yeah, Chomsky's been hitting that same drum for about 50 years. I agree. I'm so sick of hearing how the anarchist Makhnovists were just these small beans trying to do a socialism, and then the evil USSR crushed them. The Makhnovist Kontrasveda summarily executed Bolshevik leaders in the Ukraine because they posed a threat to Makhnovia. Yeah. I mean, it's again like, anarchists reinventing the idea of a proletarian state but calling it something else. Example number, 5082 or whatever. You're a disciple of Trofim Lysenko. The only possible reason that you would announce yourself that way in the chat is if you're trolling, so goodbye. Not interested. Down with Lysenkoism. For some odd reason, I was just thinking about that earlier today, where people are like, Lysenkoism is just epigenetics. First of all, are you a geneticist? I doubt it. And second of all, no, it wasn't. But, people come up with this crazy nonsense. Lysenkoism was hostile to the idea of genes. So, no, it wasn't just epigenetics. That's not it at all. Yeah. Isn't Jill Stein an anti-vaxxer? I don't know, and I honestly don't care. I just think she's a lousy candidate. It's just, if that's the best the Green Party has, then we got to up the struggle a lot to produce better leaders. PSL's candidates, I have to say, I have criticisms of PSL, like they're way too sort of campist or third worldist with regard to China. Some of their upper people, like Brian Becker, are also way too, just flat out, revisionist deeply on Russia, like Brian Becker. But yeah, so again, I have criticisms of PSL. Their candidates had a much, much better launch. And I would expect in general, the quality of the work of PSL would probably be more advanced than like a Jill Stein-led Green Party for sure. That said, when we compared the Howie Hawkins platform and agenda against PSL's back in 2020, they were very similar. So, they're not necessarily that far apart. It depends. But I do think, I have criticisms of both. Of course, I'm a communist, but my criticisms of the Greens, you find a lot more kind of libertarianism in the Green Party. It's kind of petty bourgeois, like almost kind of boomery reaction, contrarianism. I don't think you find that, like the things that I criticize about PSL are not that. They're not like, they have a lot of libertarians in it, So they're different criticisms. And I think on the whole, PSL's is, I think, preferable. That said, they're kind of trying to do different things. Howie Hawkins was pointing out, PSL kind of more trying to be like a vanguard party, whereas, the Greens are like definitely more of a mass party. So there's room for both. But I do think, there are some significant errors that should be corrected in both. And the Green Party in particular kind of needs a lot more discipline but again, it's attracting those kind of contrarian, like, don't tell me what to do, you can't make me read, people who read things are Nazis or whatever. Like, I don't know how you get discipline into a party like that. That said, I don't know, it depends. The Green Party varies widely from place to place. I think probably less than PSL does, but yeah. And by the way, these are kind of ideological or political criticisms. There's also organizational criticisms you could get into as well. This is a different sphere, though. Israel just bombs hospitals in Gaza and expects everyone to think it was Hamas or Palestinians. It's crazy. Yeah, they know no shame, apparently. Israel has a right to defend itself against hospitals and refugee camps. There you go. I'd caution people to be careful with critical theorists. Some of the biggest names in critical theory are wolves in sheep's clothing and shockingly anti-materialist. You have to be careful with that whole kind of new left, like anti-Stalinist, 1950s new left coming out of Europe and the U.S. But I guess it continues today. Gabriel Rockhill has written good articles examining the big names in critical theory and their anti-Marxist Marxism light. The KPO, Austrian party, did a discussion, kind of a Q&A with the chairman thing on Palestine yesterday, and it was very mixed. A bunch of comrades, including me, were asking the chairman why he was treating it like the Ukraine war, despite Palestine being oppressed ever since Israel's founding and the conflict being so absurdly one-sided. You know, it was interesting, and I can't speak to this so much because I'm just not as intimately familiar with European communist politics, but somebody was saying about Politsturm that they were sounding to them very, quote, European. I don't know if this is some commonality among communist views on European communist views on Palestine. But continuing the comment, they're treating the retaliation of Hamas against their oppression as equal and somewhat worse than the active genocide that Israel is performing. Yeah, so again, Hamas is the people we would least like to see in the head of the Palestinian resistance movement. That doesn't negate the fact that Palestine is fighting for existence and liberation, though. Also, and this is hugely important, armed Palestinian resistance is the effect of, not the cause of, the Israeli occupation and genocide. Want to make that super clear. It is a response, not the initiation. So people need to remember that. Continuing the comment, obviously our immediate goal is a ceasefire and a stop to the civilian deaths, but if your statement doesn't state the primary reason for the entire conflict, then you're just lost. I mean, honestly, in that case, the Communist Party of Israel had a better statement where they were blaming everything squarely on Netanyahu and the Israeli state, which is correct, for setting up this entire thing. And then, of course, why are they even there in the first place? How have they been able to sustain themselves this whole time? Is it because they're God's chosen people? Fuck no. Unless, your God is European racist imperialism, because Israel exists because of its enablers and backers, both in the military and other economic and diplomatic spheres. It's got the U.S. running cover for it, constantly. So yeah, that's why this is happening, is because Israel is continuing its aggression, and despite all of their claims of that Palestinian leadership won't engage in the peace process and whatever, fuck you. That's completely disingenuous. Israel is the one that sabotages the peace process time and time again, and they want all the territory, and they want to keep pushing. I mean, there were times where Israel was occupying even more territory than they are now. And it's because the Middle East is an area that is not real easy for US and UK sort of European quote great powers. It's not real easy for them to get direct control of that area. Palestine, of course, at one point was like a British colonial possession, and then they kind of set up Israel to take over from it as a new strategy after World War II, because it couldn't just be administrated directly anymore by the British Empire. Okay, so the hell was I even going with this? I'm tired. It's been a long month of watching and talking about all this stuff. Anyway, so it's an area that it has not been easy for the current centers of imperialism to manage, basically. So they leave behind Israel, which destabilizes the region and also serves as a direct military outpost of imperialist aligned interests, and that helps to keep the area from ever getting a leg up. So, I mean, that's obviously what's going on there. Anyway, continuing the comment, we also got the classic, we're a perpetrator state, so we need to side with the Jews. Okay, so Israel and Judaism are not the same thing. They're also saying Islamophobia is not the same as anti-Semitism. Islam is not a religion. What? What's even going on here? So, your party is kind of lost. I think they're way behind. So, is this just the issue with European communism and the, Israeli colonial question? Are they just this bad? Some commenters even said that the world is facing the global threat called Islamism. Okay, then. Yeah. Going by feeling, it was like 2 out of 4 hating on Islam. Sorry. Going by feeling, it was like 2 out of 4 hating on Islam, 1 out of 4 treating Palestine and Israel, or Hamas and Netanyahu, as equally responsible, and just about a quarter that saw Israel and Zionism as the main cause of the conflict. Well, this is what I'm saying is like a lot of parties just not in great shape right now. I was happy that I'm not the only member with this position, but sad that there are so many Islamophobes too. And again, I mean, communists should not be any particular friend of any religion. That's part of the entire existing world system that we are trying to cause an upheaval of. Marx didn't make some kind of special exception for like ruthless criticism of all that exists except religion, let alone except some particular religion. But yeah, I mean, the sort of capitalist, racist Islamophobia, that's a different thing, because again, it is more of just a cover for racism and xenophobia. Again, a people existing with a sort of, in a different place with some different cultural practices, which are maybe materially rooted in what kind of foods are available and, the climate and things like that. That's one thing. But as far as the software their brains are running, like, such as a religion or whatever, that can be changed and updated. It's like, it's not the people. But yeah, a lot of people do use, Islam is so backward as a kind of cover for their racism against the people. Like, it's not really about Islam. So a lot of dimensions there. I would expect communists to be among the better elements in society of sorting through these things. Fortunately, a lot of people passing themselves off as communists. But this is the thing about Marxism. And like kind of since the beginning, there's a lot of people who call themselves Marxists who aren't Marxists. It's just the way it's been from the beginning, and part of being a Marxist is understanding that. Is a lot of the seeming comrades around you are just not. And, it's Marxism, again, it's not an identity. It's a set of analytical tools. So, you're only as much of a Marxist as you are actually doing Marxism. You can't just call yourself that and then do things that are idealist and whatever else. You're not doing Marxism anymore. So, all right. With regard to critical theory, that perennial quote from Luxemburg applies. Today, he who wants to pass as a socialist must begin with involuntary esteem for Marx. He must begin by acknowledging himself to be Marx's disciple, by seeking in Marx's own teachings support for an attack on the latter, while he represents this attack as a further development of Marxian doctrine. On this account, we must, unconcerned by its outer forms, pick out the unsheathed kernel of Marxist theory. Yeah, so I mean, that actually ties in very well with what I was just saying. Marxism is an act. I mean, not an act that came off wrong. There's a connotation of the word act in English, which means like a put on or a lie, a con. It's an action. Marxism is something you do. It's not just something that you are. It's a way of looking at the world. It's a way of analyzing the world. It's a way of engaging with the world. And it's actually not that hard to evaluate whether someone is doing it or not. You reminded me I need to start writing about my homelessness experiences. Again, just as we read Doug's piece about organizing in a yellow union, that was really thoughtful and well done, and we put it in its own video on the channel. If anybody has, organizing experiences of any kind, or just other experiences of, being radicalized from homelessness and what you saw there and whatever, I think the whole community would benefit from that. So, yeah, if you're up for it, send it along. The banks will have to fight me if they want to take my house this time. Well, of course, they have the sheriff to do that. But, yeah. Real estate industry is messing up my city right now. That's pretty much everyone in the U.S., yeah. And it's not even just confined to the U.S., although it's particularly egregious here. So much of the U.S. is, the housing market is dramatically overvalued, like 30 to 50%. The prices are way, way above. So the thing for housing is what's considered affordable, like where people can actually pay the mortgage or rent or whatever, is when the housing cost is, or price, I guess, is 30% of your income. So you can look in an area, what's the median house price, and then what's the median income. And if, the monthly payment for that house on a typical 30-year mortgage would be more than 30% of that median income, then you got to bump it up and say, well, what percentile of income do you actually have to be at before it becomes affordable? And in a lot of places, it's like 85, 90%. You have to be in the top 10 or 15% of earners making, $110,000 to afford the monthly payments on a house. So a lot of housing way, way overvalued right now, overpriced. And those prices are going to come down because nobody can afford this. And all these sentimental, casual amateur investors that have bought properties and they're like, I'm going to get $1 million for this thing that I paid $200,000 for. And they're just sitting on it and sitting on it and sitting on it and not selling and not selling. It's causing a complete paralysis of the market. And again, this isn't a paralysis of the diamond market. This isn't a paralysis of some non-essential thing. Shelter is one of the basic human needs. So, causing a massive thing, when it crashes, it is going to be bigger than 2008, most likely because, even accounting for inflation, it's a bigger bubble than 2008. And you can see this if you want to verify that. So look at the Case-Shiller housing price chart, and then adjusted for inflation. And that's how you can see, even adjusted for inflation, it's significantly bigger than than the bubble that preceded 2008. Thank you for the link to the text. Cheap condos going up on every block that will need to be demoed in 50 years. The Cultural Revolution. In Vegas, it's 20 years, if that. I mean, it reminds me of those stories, I don't know if they're true or not, that people are saying about China. Like, they were building a lot of housing, but it was being made with, really shitty materials anyway, just reminds me of that. I mean, a lot of times these things are projection. It's like what's actually going on in this country, but I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you want to make housing that lasts for some period of time and is made of non-toxic materials. Speaking of clericalism, in Greece, Orthodox churches' priests are actually civil servants. Yeah, my understanding is Norway still has a state church as well. There's definitely places where even the bourgeois revolution didn't make it that far. Religious jurisprudence absolutely fascinates me, to be honest. Hakim also cross-posted that Quran promotion thing on a bunch of platforms. It wasn't just Twitter. So he's going for it, man. I don't know what he's doing. Yeah. We'll see. We'll see. I have a feeling the way those guys are going, it's not the most stable thing in the world. We'll see. Hakim's proselytizing that he did while utilizing the plight of the Palestinians to do it when he's supposed to be a Marxist was shameful. Yeah, that was another point a lot of people were making, bro's taking a genocide to promote a religion. What are you doing? I don't know, let alone, like, that would be in bad taste even if you weren't a Marxist, but yeah, he supposedly is. So. I've seen a bunch of comments from Americans giving the Quran a read. Yeah, that's totally what we'd like to see as Marxists, people picking up religion, right? I have read the Quran. As a former Muslim, it really isn't impressive even for a non-Marxist. What, you don't like 7th century, you know, prohibitions on what you can and cannot do? It's just wild. We just, again, that's ruling class ideology for just a completely different set of circumstances. Anyway. By the way, discussing the Islamic concept of riba is a really good place to begin agitating for class consciousness with Muslims. Profiteering from exploitative economic arrangements is prohibited. Can't tell me that landlordism is compatible with that religious prescription. This is the problem with the religions, though. And I mean, as I think it was the attitude of the workers' parties toward religion that Lenin was talking about. Like, there might be some times, and again, this was like in 19-teens Russia, where there weren't comic books, there probably nobody even had a radio, there wasn't TV, there weren't Marvel superhero movies. Like, there were not a lot of cultural, like maybe old myths that weren't specifically religious, but like there weren't a lot of cultural touchstones as far as dramas and things that you could refer to for examples that people would know. So sometimes he makes the point in there that sometimes a comrade giving a speech like way out in the sticks, if you have to be like, it's just like that story in the Bible where this was wrong, he's like, I mean, maybe if that's the only thing your audience will like grasp, but like it's not really, it shouldn't be the go-to thing. Because the other thing is, just think it through. If your whole basis of why you're engaging in some aspect of class struggle is because your holy book said so, well, what happens when it's time to give up that holy book? Does your whole support for for that struggle go with it? So there's a lot of problems of kind of like basing the locus of your power in there. It is a kind of opportunism, I think, and just problematic. And again, it's like the thing about like hitting children. If your child is old enough to use reason with them, use reason. And we're talking about adults here. If someone is old enough that you can reason with them and their sort of mind is developed enough for you to use reason with them, just use reason. You don't have to do these religious appeals to authority. You might once in a while, get some very backward people. But again, communists being the vanguard, there's then the masses, okay? The vanguard it's a relative term. It just means the most class conscious portion of society. So you've got the communist vanguard and then the masses. You have the advanced masses, the middle masses, and the backward masses. The vanguard should work with the advanced masses to bring around the middle masses and then contain the most backward masses. That's usually what you're hoping for, is just to contain them. So if there are people that literally all they will listen to is religious appeals to authority, you've just got to understand that there may not be a population you can do that much with. The good thing is there's a 2/3 of the population you probably can. But you're setting yourself up for long-term problems like, well, wait a minute, I thought you said that we should oppose the landlord thing because it's in the holy book. Now you're questioning the holy book? You've deceived me. You know what I mean? It's just, I think, better to be more rational, secular, and straightforward from the get-go. Anyway. But again, it's like, I'm qualifying this with, I think, go back to Marx. We're talking about the overturning of all that exists. It's a truly revolutionary spirit of just blowing apart what was in the past as much as is possible. So, yeah. And again, that's actually a reasonable qualification, as much as possible. And on this whole subject of the religious thing, so I was responding to commenters. I don't publish every comment that gets put through on the YouTube channel, but I do publish the better ones, or at least ones that I want to respond to particularly. We don't do just kind of like dogpiling for no real reason. I'd rather just avoid that entirely. It's not interesting to me. I don't think anybody really learns from it. And I don't like to, sometimes people will post comments that are just antagonizing another commenter, especially if I feel like the point's already been made. I may not publish that. I just like to keep the comments readable, There's that saying about not reading the comments is self-care. Well, I do have to read them because I'm moderating them. And I want to make the comment section actually readable for other people. So I do not publish things that I don't think are going to uplift the comment section. Where were we here, though? Because I had a response to someone in particular. Yeah, so here it is. Somebody said in response to this, well, let me read my response to this in the first place. So I said, P.S. For those who are really new to this, Marxism, parentheses, scientific, materialist, and religion, parentheses, mystical, idealist, are fundamentally at odds. Even the Marx quote about religion being the, quote, sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions, and I gave a link to the audiobook, is just a passing mention in an essay which begins by stating the criticism of religion is the prerequisite of all criticism and concludes by stating that the only complete liberation is liberation from the point of view of the theory which declares man to be the supreme being for man and that the proletariat must replace religion with philosophy. Lenin, so, I mean, that was like Marx's thing, is if we're going to do this thing and tear up class society, you got to dig deep and get rid of all the illusions, and those are going to be the leaders of the proletariat that actually do that. So Lenin also made significant theoretical additions to and extrapolations on how a Marxist party should handle religion, that it was understood among communists that they would be atheists and that the party should conduct atheistic, materialistic, scientific propaganda in society. However, while this did not mean that every last non-party member resident of a newly revolutionary society needed immediately to be forced into renouncing their personal beliefs, it did mean that all religious institutions would be cut off from public money and privileges, again, that war on clericalism. It also meant that communists should work as ardently as was feasible to pull the population out of ignorance and superstition, since this type of thinking could only undermine class consciousness and set up opportunities in the long term for reactionaries and counter-revolutionaries to exploit. Here's our Socialism and Religion playlist. So that's what I said. And I think that that last thing in particular, the communists working as ardently as was feasible to pull the population out of ignorance and superstition for the long-term benefit of the revolution and increasing class consciousness. That is correct. That is accurate. And there's a lot of people just looking right past that to do their defense of religion. And so anyway, there was a commenter that said, I don't know, I feel that it's much needed that Westerners finally read up on Islam in general, really, since it's the philosophy that has a strong influence on, frankly, any anti-colonial movement in the region. So again, it's not a philosophy, it's a religion and a set of myths. There are norms and values embodied in it, but philosophy, no, it's a religion. It contains God claims and different things like that. So let's not try to put this on the same footing as scientific thinking. Especially when the Israeli rhetoric is so blatantly Islamophobic. Faith does really help withstand such horrific hardships in general and can motivate for revolutionary actions. But again, not of the type Marx was talking about. And again, we can separate those out and talk about them, but Hakim is a Marxist-Leninist, according to him, as far as I understand. Hence the criticism, okay? You don't see me going out and attacking everybody that's like, Palestinians, like, sometimes lean on their faith. Yeah, this is such obvious, it's so obvious. Who could attack such a statement like that? That wasn't what this post was about. It's about a supposed Marxist-Leninist with a large following going out there and being like, here's my copy of the Quran. I love it. People struggle because of their ideas. Read some right-wingers. That's what was being criticized. Anyway. Also, I think Hakim once spoke of his strong disapproval of historic anti-religion policies of the Eastern Bloc, so it doesn't surprise me that he is a somewhat religious man. And I said, studying religion scientifically, in order to understand what myths, traditions, superstitions predominate in a culture can be important, so that socialists can interact with people from a particular background and help to raise their class consciousness effectively. But just promoting religion as a source of strength and power is something else entirely, totally anti-Marxist. Marx, in fact, theorized that in order to do the kind of revolution needed to end capitalism, etc., this is all the stuff I was talking about before. So, but Hakim was, so they responded. I think that the study of religion is more of a know thy enemy thing more than anything else for a Marxist. And yeah, just straight up religious propaganda isn't that, and that is what Hakim was doing. As far as my read on it, somebody else was asking. I'm just waiting for the comments to load here. I love this comment. As much as I don't like you, you are the most consistent and theoretically advanced on this motherfucker. You are correct 90% all the time. I love that they just threw in the as much as I don't like you. No explanation of like what they didn't like about me. But I was like, thanks. Anyway, I found the thing. What exactly is Hakim getting at here? I said, well, here's what I got out of it. 1, the Quran is my favorite book. 2, people engage in struggle because of ideas. 3, study the life of Muhammad because there are important parallels to today. And 4, anti-LGBTQ fascists like Geers Wilder lackey Joram van Klaveren become good and highly recommendable when they convert to Islam but stay fascist. So that's the those were my takeaways. Anyway, I think we're beating this thing to death, so let's see if we can move on. I would think if someone wanted a way to introduce Marxism to Muslims, they would use philosophy from Hoxha. Socialist Albania was predominantly Muslim, right? Yes, it was. Excellent point, because Albania had been part of the Turkish Empire. So yeah, it was Muslim. So yeah, ask Hoxha what he thought about it. In fact, we'll be doing some things from Hoxha's collection on feminism and women's struggle, talking about the second-class citizen status that religion confers to women, particularly within Islam. I mean, in Albania's Cultural Revolution, they basically did end up, and this was not right after the revolution, but they did end up having a big full frontal attack on religion. So yeah. I unsubscribed to Hakim after you made that post. I think you mean you unsubscribed after I pointed out that he made that post. But yeah, I get what you're saying. And people want to stay subscribed to Hakim. That's your call. I'm just pointing out that that is about as blatantly anti-Marxist-Leninist as I could possibly think of on a fairly important subject. If somebody's going to feed you that line of horse shit, what else are they going to feed you? That would be what I would be wondering. Yes, the Deprogram have Breadtube aspirations. Sorry, I don't need a Deprogram tote bag. The commercialism and the sponsorships and things are somewhat, yeah. And yes, thank you for the timestamps to where Politsturm is talking about S4A in that stream. It's 41 minutes in. Fair enough. My teacher said that calling Israel an occupational force or a hegemony is anti-Semitic. So the entire world, I'm pretty sure, recognizes the Golan Heights as Syrian territory, but occupied by Israel. It's absolutely, there's that's not anti-Semitic. It's not anti-Jewish. Israel is a state. It has to abide by the laws of this world. You know what I mean? It wants to be a state. Okay, it wants to be a government. This is how governments can and can't behave in this current era. So yeah, the occupied territory is an established legal fact. So anyway, what your teacher is teaching is just wrong there. Oh, nice. Socialist Albanian currency. We'll be doing some more Hoxha coming up on the channel really soon. He did a collection on Palestine called Palestine Belongs to the Palestinians. I want to read that, but before we do that, he talks a lot. It's from the 70s and early 80s. He talks a lot about Soviet revisionism and Soviet social imperialism. So if you're not familiar with that, might seem like it's coming out of left field. I'm doing 2 hour-long pieces prior to that, the modern revisionists and something about the Soviet demagogues, just to give people more of a background where Hoxha is coming from in the Palestine thing, about his criticisms of the way that the USSR at that time in the 70s was involving itself in the Palestinian liberation efforts. I try to argue with my teacher when he says that. When he says that the pictures of babies dying is used by Hamas to make Israel look bad. I mean, Israel did that. So, I mean, they're making themselves look bad. Hamas is just pointing it out in that case. I understand that there's no need to argue with these fascists. You're probably right in the end. That said, I've had a few comments from people recently that have written to me in DMs. I just read one on Reddit the other day. Somebody DM'd me. They were here. Let me read it, actually, because I told this person that I would. I won't say who it was, but I don't actually remember off the top of my head. But there was somebody that DM'd me. Oh, I'm opening a Reddit tab. This is always dangerous for my browser. I don't know what it is. I feel like Reddit just absolutely saps my CPU power more than anything else. I'm just going to open one Reddit tab and go down to the chat, because somebody just recently sent me a message about how they were reconsidering their views about Israel. So it's loading now. Let me just get this. Where are we? Okay, here we go. Hi, I want to preface this by saying that I'll be talking about some struggles I've been having as a Jew, and how recently my community's emotions and my own have changed our views completely, and asking for certain ways to help with it, both for myself and for my community. So I recently have fallen down a very twisted pipeline of pro-Zionism and racism against Palestinian people. Yesterday I realized that I have become someone unrecognizable who hates innocent people like I used to love them. What ways are there to get rid of these subconscious ideas in my head? I'm Jewish, and so much of my world around me is based off of anti-Palestinian sentiment. Sorry, I know it's probably a very esoteric question, but honestly, you're the only socialist YouTuber I'd consider knowledgeable enough to know how to get cultural notions from being so persistent. At my shul, Jewish church, there's a constant stream of pro-Zionism messages, such as prayers for the IDF soldiers. Ooh, I can't not go to it, so what's the most moral thing to do? Let me continue. Completely understand if these questions aren't appropriate or don't work. Just saw your recent post on YouTube and thought it could be a chance to reach out. Still understand if you don't respond. P.S. We actually got into an argument about the Israel-Palestine conflict when this horrible war first broke out. I said something stupid and you told me to F off. That was one of the more recent things which made me question the Zionist movement as practiced by the Israeli government, so thank you for that. And I said to this person, I'm glad you're becoming more critical of it. I'll give it some thought and get back to you. And, this is why I do try to be honest with people, and I would encourage people, ruthless criticism. Ruthless, by the way, doesn't mean nasty. It means go there, go there. Be tactful, be respectful to people, but at the same time, stick with the truth. It's just the best thing. And, that's what's actually going to set us free in the end. Science is the pursuit of truth, really above all else. And that's what we're looking for. So living in accordance with truth and reality is what is going to actually serve us. So, yeah, I think in that case, probably that very stern reply of just like, fuck off, you're talking like a fascist, maybe helped shake something loose in this person. And because that was about all I had for them at that point. I don't actually remember that exchange specifically, so I can't actually speak to that or how the original thing went. But according to them, I told them to fuck off, and I guess they had enough respect for my opinion that they gave it some thought, and now they're having a paradigm shift where they're like, whoa, I'm in a fascist community where at my supposed spiritual community, they're rooting for a colonial army to fucking kill babies. What do I do about that? So first thing, I would encourage you to look up everything you can about anti-Zionist Jewish people, and anti-Zionist Jewish people definitely exist in the United States and around the world. you can find anti-Zionist Jewish people. I would strongly recommend you to get involved in that, lend your voice to it if you can, because it needs to be clear that the settler colonial Israeli project is a racist colonial project basically backed by European and US centered, that part of the world imperialist system. That's what it's all about. It's not Judaism. It's a land grab. I mean, it's a territorial fight over material resources. And there's plenty of kind of Marxist and left-wing anti-Zionist from a Jewish perspective. And start by reading everything you can from that. I don't know that you're going to be able to change your community's minds if they're sort of using even their like temple experience to sort of root for soldiers. That's sickening. And again, it's so your shul is basically blurring the line between the state of Israel and Judaism. So you then, if this is how you feel, need to reject that. And so just find out everything you can about anti-Zionist Judaism. There are people, you can listen to interviews. There's even like Orthodox rabbis, which there's a lot of problems with Orthodox Judaism just in and of itself. But there are ones that don't support the state of Israel. So as far as, whatever kind of false and reactionary views they may have, that in particular is not one of them. And you might be able to learn some things and get some talking points off of them. I know that there are, interviews. Actually, you know what? Somebody sent me one. They're not that hard to find. Just look at like rabbis against Israel and stuff like that. It's out there. If you can't leave, I'm assuming maybe you're younger or something like that. If you can't actually leave, or maybe you're just in some other family situation where you're under intense pressure to attend those ceremonies. You're not the first person to be in that situation. I would point you to other people in your community that share your views, and there are quite a number. So that's what I would probably point you to the most. But stay in touch, and I'm happy to kind of hear how it goes and see if we can brainstorm other things as you go. I would like to help support people in making that journey away from, due to a religion supporting something so heinous. I mean, supporting that for any reason, but let alone something that's supposed to be, about, whatever the hell religion's supposed to be about. All right, so hopefully that's helpful, but do stay in touch, and that's what I recommend starting with. And if anybody in the chat has anything else, we'll share that as well. Getting rid of bourgeois and capitalist propaganda in the working class consciousness is the hardest thing communists must do, possibly the hardest task in the communist movement. I mentioned those Hoja pieces. I've started recording one already, the Modern Revisionists from 1964. Probably be up on the channel by the time, probably either later today or tomorrow, definitely by the time the stream is posted. But there's a great passage in that about how social democracy, reformism, is the intrusion of bourgeois thought into the workers' movements. And revisionism is the intrusion of bourgeois thought into the communist movement. I was just like, damn, silver platter. I thought that was really well stated. Twitch deleted my other comment. I basically just said people that are religious are pretty much just in the dark when it comes to dialectics. I wonder if a guy named Carl wrote about applying dialectics to reality. Absolutely. I mean, but I think for some people, knowing is scary. It's just it's the like, I don't want to know anymore type of thinking. And sometimes, it can be an unpleasant shock gaining social consciousness, gaining class consciousness, gaining that worldly consciousness. And some people do just want to check out and just, let Jesus take the wheel, and in so many ways, mentally and otherwise. Yeah, it can be uncomfortable coming to terms with the fact that people rule this world, and it's not Jesus and Satan, and it's not all this other stuff. It is, whatever spirit of, whatever other pantheon of, immaterial godly forces your culture may have told you about. It's not that. It's people, and you're a person, and you're in one class or the other, and you're either empowered or you're not empowered. And if you're not empowered, you need to fight for power. Otherwise, you and the rest of your class are going to get railroaded. These are like, it's an uncomfortable level of responsibility for some people. And as communists, we need to help each other and encourage each other and show the solidarity and show the just basic human compassion to help each other through those realizations and to just help each other come to terms with the need for the struggle for power and to maintain class consciousness even when it's uncomfortable. You know, we can help each other with that, and we can teach each other, and we can take care of each other. And we can take care of each other just on the basis that we are material suffering creatures. And life is hard, and we have empathy. That really can be enough. You know, it really can be enough. Lysenkoist gets selected out of the chat's gene pool, indeed. Yeah, and absolutely, Infracell did do the Lysenkoist thing at one point. It's like, is it a form of anti-communism, I think, to just repeatedly promote all of the mistakes? Like, even a correct overall movement is going to make mistakes. I think it's a form of anti-communism to just highlight the mistakes and, like, pretend that they're victories. Lysenkoism, for sure. The Zionists are trying to identify anti-Zionism, which is a political movement, with anti-Semitism, which is a racist or which is, well, basically racist. So let's try that again. The Zionists are trying to identify anti-Zionism, which is protest of a government and colonial project, with anti-Semitism, which is hatred for a people. And this will have serious consequences for Jews given the rise of fascism, especially in Europe. Yeah, one thing we do know about Europeans is they don't need a ton of extra incentive to go on an anti-Semitic type of scapegoating quest. That's been a problem throughout European history, and there's been all different forms of Jewish persecution. Obviously, like under Nazi Germany, it reached truly epic mass murder Holocaust proportions. But even before that, there was all kinds of different Jewish persecution, both in the forms of like bodily violence, as well as, prohibition from being in certain professions and things like that. So there's all kinds of anti-Jewish sentiment in Europe. That's never really been thoroughly cleansed. And the United States has also had organized anti-Jewish persecution as well, the KKK, for example. As well as many other, the KKK is like a really crude and obvious form, but there's many other kinds of organized anti-Jewish prejudice in the U.S. But yeah, Europeans do not need any kind of strong push to have an anti-Jewish flare-up, for sure. Why not anti-Semitic? Well, also Arabic people are Semitic, so that's all like biblical horseshit anyway. It goes back to like, what was it, the first three, Ham, Sem, and what was the other one? It's like just, anyway, yeah, the whole Semitic thing is kind of a canard in the first place. Doesn't the Green Party just end up filling a vacuum that is left unfilled by a true organized left? They're on the left and they're taking up the space that they are, and they don't have a lot of competition. So I think I at least 50% agree with what you're saying. I agree with the facts of it, that it's not a particularly well-organized party. It's not a particularly strongly principled party. It's not a particularly well-disciplined party. But, yes, they're taking up a lot of space that should be easily outcompeted by other parties, right? But there's not a lot of competition. So that kind of speaks to what's going on with the left in general. Is there's not a lot of class consciousness, there's not a strong labor movement. We're starting to see now more fight back in tenants unions and labor unions and all kinds of other forms of struggle are starting up. I think that those kind of politics, those grassroots left politics, will generate more leaders and, again, better struggle, better vanguard. Because remember, the vanguard is just the cream of the crop, the most class conscious of the working class. So yeah, the sort of the state of the parties now reflects the state of the overall working class. That makes sense. So Israel and its asymptotic peace process is just a way of stalling for time while they continue to carry out their ethnic cleansing of these small slivers of land left in the hands of Palestinians. Absolutely. Yeah, I don't think it's very hard to look at Israel's behavior and rhetoric and to think that they're somehow earnestly engaged in the peace process and all they want is peace. I mean, those poor Israelis, right? Like, all they want is peace. And they have to keep taking more and more land. Poor them. It's so horrible. Must be tough, you know? Must be tough to be getting all the oil that's under the lands that are currently owned by Palestinians. The next thing you know, they're going to have to sell that oil at a big profit. It's so hard, so hard. Won't someone think of Israel? On the question of, quote, European-sounding Marxism-Leninism, who both sides this issue? It makes me wonder if Marx and Lenin were wrong about how the imperial core countries, the countries with the most developed stage of capitalism, would be the first to do revolution. I see more chauvinism and rightist fascist errors, especially if this, quote, European communism and colonial misunderstanding is not fought against. This is kind of what I was getting to in the question of it might be that the rest of the world, like, in other words, don't ever overestimate people's sort of willingness to do the right thing. Or let me, even that is judgmental on my part. Let me pull back and get a little bit more detached. If we're talking about a view of history, historical materialism, where basically class interests and material interests are what motivates people and that class struggle is the motive force of history, then look at it from the point of view of the bourgeoisified proletariat of the advanced countries. There's an underdeveloped world out there to exploit. Their countries are exploiting it. They can either go through a big scary process of revolution, which may not be worth it. They might be executed. Their children might be thrown in jail or whatever. Or they can sit back and be cowards and, listen. Their fear might be outweighing their thought of what the benefit is. And so, you can put moral judgments on that. It may be that they just really calculated it was in their best material interest to wait this one out. And so it might not be until that material incentive for the people in the imperialist countries. Like, in other words, it might have to get worse to the point where the system, as I'm describing, has crashed 4 times. We have basically worse and successively worse 2008 type events every decade, or like so we're 15 years out from 2008. All right. And actually, arguably, a lot of this started in 2019 into 2020, but then we had the pandemic, and that gave cover with it. Wasn't a systemic event, it was a biological, natural event. Well, to some extent that was true, but we were probably headed into kind of this economic breakdown again anyway, and that was only 11 or 12 years out from 2008. So, okay, we're probably heading into it 15 years later, but then the next one might be only 7 or 8, and so on. Once you've got people who they were 20 years old, or they were 15 years old, and their parents lost their house in 2008, 2009. Then they're trying to enter the workforce in the 20-teens and the 2020s, and the fucking pandemic and the economy blows out again. Then, they're trying to, do whatever they're doing with like their own life goals and their own career, their own housing. They have a family situation, whatever. And the economy breaks down again. At some point, people go, what's in this for me? You know what I mean? So in other words, it's legitimately harder and somewhat less it's easier to embrace those petty bourgeois illusions when capitalism is still in its ascending. There's still a lot more profits to go around. There's still a lot more concessions that the ruling class can kind of throw. As you get into a system where it's sort of, the crash of 29 every 10 to 15 years, that's a system people can just not believe in as much. The material incentive is gone even to be a bourgeoisified proletarian. And I wonder if at that point, that's unfortunately called learning the hard way, or, taking the long road. and waiting till the absolute last possible minute to end capitalism, as it has already brought the planet to the brink of ecocide, climate change, mass extinction of many different species, including possibly undercutting the material basis of like all the agriculture that like our species depends on at this point. So yeah, I mean, it may be a situation of not thinking people are going to do the right thing before the absolute last possible minute where they have to. And we can just hope it's not too late, and try to get people as ready as possible, as quickly as possible. That was one of the things about Russia. Why did they have the revolution? Well, they were on track to have a bourgeois revolution, which actually put them way behind most of Europe in 1917. There was arguably an ongoing bourgeois revolution starting in 1905. But their organizing was so good on the socialist side that they were able to actually really follow Marx's original idea, and as the bourgeoisie was just trying to set up their government, steal it out from under them and do a socialist revolution. Well, that's exactly what Lenin and the Bolsheviks were able to do. What Lenin and the Bolsheviks were able to do was an example not many other parties in Europe were able to really get close to. Part of that is because of the conditions in Russia being as horrible as they were. And also then, at the time when the bourgeois provisional government was setting up, Lenin's absolute, astuteness and genius, and the other Bolsheviks in being able to identify and follow a correct course of action, and not letting really a moment go to waste. It was just like they didn't let up for a minute, and they got everything right, and they won. A lot of other parties, did some of those things, but not enough of them to actually pull off the revolution. Okay. So, while it's possible to defeat the bourgeoisie like way in the beginning or after a war, it's just there's not enough in it. Unfortunately, for you're living in an imperialist country, you're cut off from the realities of what this system causes for other people around the world. It's not real to you. And of course, the imperialist media tries to especially pre-internet. The internet is changing a lot in terms of making this a more information-rich environment. But you're cut off from the realities of what's going on around the world. You might even be cut off, if you're really middle class, from what's going on in the poor sections of the city you live in. So that's how much I think sometimes the class consciousness gets stuck. The imperialists are very good at sort of down managing class consciousness. But, the further that goes along, the more extreme the conditions are going to have to get for people to get the motivation to, get off their asses and do it. Again, we don't hold the view that people just engage in liberation movements because it's the moral thing or anything like that. It's ultimately like there has to be something in it for their class. And if they believe that if they hold off on revolution now, they get some other reward within this system without taking a big risk, then a lot of them are going to do that. So anyway, there's a lot of, I think, reasons why people do get morally outraged at the complacency and the complicity. Although the populations of the imperialist countries they're not even necessarily cognizant that they are complicit in something horrific. Like, you might know it if you're outside those countries, but if you were born in that country, and again, with the internet now, this is starting to change substantially, but even going back 20 years ago, you might not really know what's going on, like that your country is doing these horrible things or that you're benefiting from them. Your frame of reference is just going to be confined to what's in front of you. So I know that there is, sometimes a tendency to be hugely morally judgmental of the kinds of things that the populations of imperialist countries are complicit in. And sometimes they are knowingly. Sometimes they're knowingly complicit in them. A lot of times they're not. And anyway, I just think there's a certain amount of satisfaction I see people trying to get out of those condemnations. And okay, I think it's somewhat self-indulgent to a point. Like, yes, it does reaffirm your moral stance towards what's going on. And it's, correct. But I don't know if the people you're judging even know what they're doing? Should they know what they're doing? Maybe. But it's like these are like 3 or 4 steps removed from, they see what's in front of them. They don't know where it came from. That's what the system presented to them. And it's also made it very difficult for them to get any other perspective about it or any other context for the way their life is run and for the options that are put in front of them. And they really are kept in a pretty carefully crafted state of ignorance. So, you know, that is the conditions that a lot of people are dealing with. And for those of you who have been radicalized in, let's say, the last 10 years or so, go back to, you know, the way that you came up. And we were talking about this before. A lot of people came to being a Marxist through being disabled or some other situation where you really got, or maybe it was racism, or maybe it was like homophobia or whatever. Some situation where you really got thrown away by society, where you were just outside of that, and you realized, oh, this system is extremely callous, and it does a lot of harm. And then maybe that put you on a path of like, why is it this way? And finding out more about, holy shit, you know, this government overthrew this other government just so they could get oil, and so on. Again, I think with the internet, that sort of, that ignorance is evaporating now more than ever. And it does become more of a situation of like, I think it'll be a point, especially in 5 or 10 years, where any ignorance is like willful ignorance because the information is right in front of you. But I don't know. You know, as in terms of the question of when do the people in the imperialist countries actually decide enough's enough, it takes a lot because they have the most to lose in losing capitalism. In other words, they're up against a big police state. They're relatively comfortable. It doesn't mean they're absolutely comfortable. It means they're relatively comfortable compared to the proletariat of various other countries that are not as successfully engaging in the exploitation of other countries. And it'll take a lot for, and you know, that's just to get the class consciousness. Then there's the whole question of how to effectively organize, and then what strategies and tactics to use in the struggle. So there's like a lot of questions. I think a lot of times people do want to engage in the moralizing and the condemnations and the outrage about what's going on. And I do it too sometimes. It's somewhat inevitable because you're a human being. You have a heart beating in your chest, like you have a conscience, and you're upset about social injustices. That alone just isn't going to get us where we need to go. And, you know, at a certain point, all of the just social media clicking and all caps typing, it does become somewhat self-indulgent at some point. I'd really like to remind people who engage in hours and hours of this per day on a social media site, let's say Twitter, how far are you actually getting with it? I know that sometimes people need to go through a period of that where they're just adjusting their own norms in their own mind. Like they're just like, I'm part of a new community. This is what is accepted and condoned. Here's what is rejected and looked down upon. And yeah, so you might go through a period of adjusting that. That in and of itself is just not really going to change that much. And I'd just like to remind people of that. We don't want to encourage like terminal online behavior. Actually, somebody was just talking in the comments about how Discord servers can get extremely toxic. It's why I don't run one. I think that people already spend way too much time online, and I don't want to encourage them to spend any more time online because a lot of those interactions are just not necessarily the best. So that said, there is a huge shift of values going on among people who are getting radicalized against capitalism. Thumbs up, like A-OK, totally want to support that. But do want to remind people, like, that's just one step along the process. All right. All right, looking through the comments here, we're in like maybe the last 20 minutes of the stream. So I want to just catch up with the chat and do some of the highlights here. Tofu Dreg Projects. That's the name they use for the really shitty quality houses sometimes built in China. Interesting. This is not defending Hakim, but I will say more Muslim people I talk to are more advanced on the Palestinian question than is the average, quote, liberal. So liberal is in quotes. Let me just say there are liberal Muslims. So I think liberal here is maybe like a euphemism for something else, like white person. And so why is that? Is it because the Muslim people have a religious belief, or is it because they have family in the Middle East? They've been maybe to Palestine. They see themselves and people like them. They relate very easily to people who are in Gaza. So they see that suffering and they see themselves and they understand immediately how horrific it is, versus people who maybe don't as readily identify because they might look a little bit more different than Arabic people do. You know, if you're of European descent, you might not identify as readily, and you might, particularly if you're extremely sheltered and kind of racist, you might not really get it, and like, oh, well, maybe the Israelis, have a reason for it, and, it looks bad. I don't like war, but who can really say who's right and who's wrong? I don't think that that's like a Muslim versus non-Muslim thing so much as it's like, I mean, in terms of like, there's something in the religion that is like, don't kill children. That don't kill children is like a fairly universal, most humans would not really want to engage in that behavior. That's not something that Muslims really have a monopoly on. But yeah, it's probably they have some more, they relate to it, and maybe even have like direct family members they care about in that area. So yeah, I would think that that's actually the difference there. Would you lump deists, pantheists, and irreligious people in general in the atheist materialist camp? I get where you're coming from in that question, but I can't actually tell you the last time I met a deist or a pantheist. So I think to some extent this is a highly hypothetical question. Okay. I haven't read the Quran and forgot any Bible verses from childhood, being from a tiny rural town in Texas. Hardcore Christianity is what drove me to the left initially. You mean to get away from Christianity, or you felt like there was a connection between Bible Belt Christianity and the left? I'm assuming the former, but everybody has their own story. Hakim is a dungist. That's what I keep hearing. Holy shit, if as a Marxist you don't have a few minutes worth of theory on your reading list, that you have time to idly pick up the Quran, then you're either a speed reader, like, oh yeah, you already read all that Marxist theory, huh? Time to go slum with the Quran myths. Then you're either a speed reader or you need to focus on the important stuff. You want post-colonialism? Don't go to the Quran. Read Said and Fanon instead. That's what a lot of people were saying on Twitter, too. They're like, I thought he was going to say Said. In fact, a lot of people were accusing Hakim of Orientalism in that post. That was another thing I saw quite a bit. The main issue I see with religion is that there will always eventually come a point where your religious convictions come into conflict with communist convictions. You have to make a choice at some point. Muhammad should be studied not as a religious figure, but as a military leader. Okay, and even then, there's a certain point at which, yes, 7th century tactics may apply today and may not in modern warfare, but might be, interesting thought exercises to understand what things were like at the time, but yeah. Hakim is at best a social fascist. The fact that he thinks China is socialist should tell you everything. I actually subscribed to Hakim shortly before this incident, hoping to get some more nuance on the regional situation with Palestine. But the first thing I got after subscribing was seeing a community post telling me to read the Quran. I got a couple of the new anti-ad blocker scripts for YouTube and Twitch, and they work great. They mute and end these crappy ads. Thank you for sharing those. Yeah, I've been using Brave browser. Works great. Have not had a single problem. Like, I didn't even have to install anything. Just, it works out of the box. KKE, the Greek party, however, does not raise the issue of religion much because it does not want such an issue of confrontation to divert the attention of the people from the class struggle. And I think that that's typical. Like, it's not something that's taken head on. It's understood that people who become communists are atheists. Like, that's within the party something you expect. When you're conducting agitation among the people, though, it's not that you go on an anti-religious crusade. That's really not the thing. It's that you just try to get people to focus on the here and now, on material reality. Like, that's what you want their attention on. It doesn't mean you have to, you can positively just redirect people's attention to class struggle. And if the people start bringing up religion, you can just be like, yeah, but about that thing we were just talking about, you can just keep moving their attention away from it. And, again, whatever void religion was filling in their life, you can fill it with actual science instead. And you can do it in a way where, yeah, probably the less confrontational you are about it, the better. The less, it doesn't have to be a thing. In fact, that's probably more likely to engender resistance. I don't know how to pronounce this, but B''TSELEM is a really good Jewish anti-Zionist source, although it's really heartbreaking to see what they document. Okay, so that's B''TSELEM for Jewish anti-Zionism. Okay, I haven't seen that, but let me copy that down for my own notes, take a look at that. I am doing a lot more in the community posts now. So, I do like one or two of those a lot of days of the week, and yeah. Everyone should read the B'Tselem, guessing at the pronunciation there, report on apartheid in Israel. Surviving a school shooting turned me into a communist, so maybe something about crisis and coming close to death can make you critically reassess your thinking. Yeah, and I think in situations like that, people will gravitate toward the best thing they have access to. You know what I mean? Like, there's sometimes people will have like a major event that sort of breaks down, or like their model of reality gets shown to them, like their assumptions that they were operating on just get really upended, and they spend 6 months or a year in crisis, and then they might become like a born-again Christian or something just because it gave them some answers, and like they needed a new order in their thinking because the old mental belief system that they had just got shredded. And so they realized that they were like non-functional without one. But this is the question of like, do you care if your beliefs are true? What we'd like to see people adopt is a belief system that actually matches reality to the best of our understanding, and that's through scientific finding and the scientific method, and historical materialism, dialectical thinking, and so on. But yeah, I think it can be, crises can bring about change in people because it can make them say, wow, the world isn't the way I thought it was, and I've got to, if I care at all about how the world works, then I've got to look at, things that maybe I was critical of before. Can't discount Operation Gladio on why Italy, Greece, and Turkey are not communist. Tons of legwork by the USA. Yeah, so that was post-World War II. Gladio was stay behind fascist networks. I was talking even about like earlier, World War I, and then like right out, during and right after World War II. But yeah, absolutely. In the last post-war period, the imperialists went all out with their anti-communism. This was the Cold War, basically, trying to prevent any other countries from having revolutions. And they went to really extreme lengths to do that, and then we're in the situation that we're in now. But that can never save them from the fact that their system is going to keep having crises. Capitalism is just baked into capitalism. Operation Gladio is such a black pill, and every socialist needs to learn about it. We have 3 videos from actually the BBC of all places, Time Watch. BBC Time Watch series did like a 3-hour thing, pretty detailed about Gladio. I'm sure there's more information that you can dig up. And again, Bestie Marx, another YouTube channel and large Twitter account, has more information on Gladio. But yeah, we have some of that up on the channel. Basically, it was NATO intelligence terrorism. anti-communist terrorism. And they didn't even wait for revolutions to happen. They were just proactively doing like mass shootings as false flags and then blaming it on the left. But it was actually fascists that were doing it under the purview of like CIA and NATO intelligence. That was what was coordinating it. The nuclear weapon, in my opinion, added 100 years to capitalism. Yeah, I mean, so this is something I've considered as well. And this is where you get like Posadism from. Basically the idea that should the proletariat even fear the nuclear weapon or just press on with revolution anyway. But basically, you know, prior to nuclear weapons, you could have an armed conflict without the threat of like total annihilation. After nuclear weapons, you had the possibility of total annihilation and also the contamination of the land, like for, you know, millennia afterwards. Nixon was thinking of using nuclear weapons in Vietnam. He was talked out of it. But yeah, I mean, that's one communist revolution that was almost thwarted by nuclear weapons. So yeah, I think it pushed struggle into a place where people were walking on eggshells a lot more, and it was kind of this question of like, is the U.S. or some other imperialist country crazy enough to, if we piss them off that much, use a nuke? And, you know, it was a possibility. It confuses me how people can say that Stalin distorts Marxism. Yeah, you're not the first to wonder that, actually. A lot of people, you know, think of the kind of image that gets painted of Stalin as this kind of thug and whatever. They read, then, Stalin's theoretical works and historical works, and it's like, no, he was actually a really committed socialist and very thoughtful. So that can be a surprise to a lot of people. My best guess is that increasing climate disaster might be the cataclysm that dislodges the ruling class. It took the Black Death to end feudalism, after all. The proletariat needs to develop its strength so that we can step in, if that's the case. Yeah, and again, just to clarify what I was saying, it's like, you want, in the best of all possible worlds, for people to develop class consciousness easily, you know, the easy way. Like, things go bad in their life, someone explains to them that it's capitalists exploiting them, and they don't put up 1,000,001 psychological defense mechanisms about how they don't need to change and actually they'll just wait it out and blah, blah, blah. The reality is human psychology is not, you know, doesn't run along the straightest track. We have a lot of vulnerabilities and we're very prone to a lot of fallacious thinking and emotional weaknesses and, you know, just vulnerabilities. There's a lot of weird stuff under the hood in the human mind. And yeah, you know, I wish it didn't take so much for so many people to accept the way things are. It unfortunately, oftentimes, you know, just kind of does. Whatever crisis or crises will end up dislodging the ruling class this time around. As communists, the task remains the same: build community, build a party, build a movement. Absolutely, because that's what I was trying to say is it's about the relative strength of the two classes. The capitalists can suffer a huge crash and huge, you know, disorganization, doubt among capitalists as to whether their system is even sustainable, if it even can be rebuilt. But if the working class, you know, they can go down to, you know, on a scale from 0 to 100, they could be down to a 2 or a 3 in terms of their strength, organization, confidence, and solidarity, their belief in the future of their system. But if workers don't get organized and workers are still at 1 or 0, then we'll still lose. So no matter what, yeah, it's always about build community, build a party, build a movement, build class consciousness, which emerges partly out of study, but partly out of struggle. I think some of the most important parts come directly out of struggle because you see, you know, oh, you want to raise the minimum wage. Who's fighting you on that? It can be really eye-opening. Oh, you want to, you know, impose whatever kind of, you know, housing reform in your area. Who's fighting you on that? You see that these scumbags come out of the woodwork to fight you, and it can be really eye-opening of like, holy shit, I didn't accept that such fucking pieces of shit actually existed. It was words on a page to me, and then I saw them. They were fighting back against this thing that we were fighting for in my community. And that can be real eye-opening. It can really make you cross that threshold of just accepting, yeah, the class struggle is very real. We're in it. And I think it's after an event like that where people just can't turn their back on it again. I think that as long as they're in the same class anyway, it's possible, I think, for people to maybe become petty bourgeois and then get out of the struggle. But I think once you've been through certain experiences and you've seen the reality of the class struggle, you just can't really go back to not seeing it. Since crisis facilitates revolution, I mean, yes and no. So actually, organization facilitates revolution. Crisis just lowers the bar for making it possible. So yeah, it's like, the crisis, again, it weakens the other side so that it increases the relative strength of the counterpower, which in this case is the proletariat. But it doesn't increase the absolute strength of the proletariat. You see what I mean? Only organizing, agitation, education, things like that. Build a community, build a party, build the struggle. That's what builds our strength, absolutely. But a crisis relatively increases proletarian strength by weakening the capitalists. So, whereas it might have been a 4-to-1 ratio, the crisis might cut it down to 2-to-1, and then turns out the odds are close enough that the proletariat can actually wage, a fair struggle at that point and might actually win. Yeah, eat the trolls, but save some room for the rich. No, actually, a little side note about Eat the Rich. It's not merely a blanket endorsement of cannibalism. Actually, it's like eventually, there will be such poverty, there will be nothing left to eat but the rich. So in that case, you can have some trolls now. If it comes down to eating the rich, you will necessarily have room for them. Modern monetary theory. Wasn't the Deprogram talking about modern monetary theory, like promoting it? I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure somebody pointed that out. Or Second Thought was talking about MMT. States that the U.S. bourgeoisie can print infinite money to a point. After a certain point, it devalues the money because you're not changing the amount of value. You're just changing the amount of currency. So, more money doesn't mean like more goods and services necessarily. And that taxes exist to enforce adherence to the USD. It's basically like Keynesian economics, just rehash, sort of, reformist sock-dem stuff. It's capitalist. I mean, by the time you get, like, after a revolution, remember, communism is working, or socialism is a transitional state towards a completely money-less society. So at that point, you don't need the crutch of money anymore. But MMT, I mean, I don't know what else you want to know about it, but it's basically like Keynesianism as far as I understand it. And I don't really know the point that MMT people are even trying to make. Like, this has been known for, since the 1930s at least, like on a widespread basis. I don't really get the point of MMT now. So, My problem with MMT, says a commenter, is it ignores how commerce works, and if they were to do such a thing, the international legitimacy of the US dollar would go into crisis. So that's already happening. And there are already, China's economy is so big, the BRICS bloc is talking about, they've not at all reached a consensus yet, but they're talking about, trying to switch to doing transactions in other currencies. The Indians want it to be the rupee. There's sort of different a disagreement on what the new currency would be, whether it would just be local currencies or whether it would be the yuan or whatever. If it'd be like a singular new one or if it would be some other system. But yeah, that's already happening with the U.S. because the quantitative easing, they are dumping money. There's $9 trillion of assets on the Fed's balance sheet. That is not even close to anything they've done in history. It was always less than $1 trillion prior to 2008. And this is the bailout system. It's a life support for the U.S. economy and all of the rest of the global imperialist system that's attached to the U.S. economy. When it goes down, that's what I was saying in the video that I posted, where another 2008 is coming one way or another, because Either they do the quantitative tightening and reduce the amount of money in circulation, and that causes a crisis, or they keep it high and everything becomes unaffordable, and then all the sales stop, like has already happened in the housing market, and then prices come back down anyway. So it's like there's nothing. It was life support for a limited amount of time, but no matter what, it's coming back again anyway. So yeah, anyway. We need a vanguard. We need more people to do the actual reading. I mean, we have a vanguard now in that it's, again, it's a relative term. It's the upper, 5 or 10% most class conscious portion of the working class. It just happens to be not a very good vanguard. And if we can be honest with ourselves about that, then we stand a chance of improving it. And, reading is part of it. And it's an important part because you have to know the 175-year history of Marxism and the 200-year history, roughly, of anti-capitalism in general. Because there was a portion even before Marx and Engels that they created scientific socialism, what became known as Marxism, by criticizing the existing utopian socialism. So yeah, you do have to know all that stuff. Otherwise, you're just going to waste time going in circles with things that already were done and already were proven not to work. So I actually like getting into the Hoja and some of the Maoist readings because they're from the later 20th century. It actually represents the incorporation of, like part of the reason why Lenin, Marxism-Leninism is a thing is it significantly described new conditions. Like Marx and Engels were writing about the 19th century, and then Lenin updated it to be about the age of imperialism, like kind of a new stage of capitalism, and the conditions that were going on with proletarian revolutions and national liberation struggles and things like that. And Lenin also engaged in, just as Marx and Engels engaged in struggle against the anarchists and other, utopian socialists, Lenin engaged in struggle against the Bernsteins and the liquidationists and Kautskyists and, other opportunists and revisionists, distorters of Marxism. Well, then, after Stalin, there was another significant period of revisionism in the USSR. So that was the 50s and the 60s. Where do you get that? And it's in Maoism, in Hoja's Marxist-Leninist writings, that you get these sort of later 20th century commentaries on some of China's, opening up, criticism from a Marxist-Leninist perspective and things like that. And now that we have done a lot more of the basics on the channel, we'll be getting into more of that stuff. We'll be doing also another pass on the early stuff. Again, a Rosa series, a Marx and Engels series, which then will kind of wrap it up, and probably there won't be much, if any, other Marx and Engels that we'll even need to do, because it'll basically be done at that point after we've done what I'm planning. At least have an extremely good, won't be every last thing by far, but it'll be most of the stuff. And, if you read or listen to all of that, you'll be way ahead of most people. So anyway, Marxist theory continued to develop even through the later 20th century, even now. And, getting into some of that more advanced stuff, it's important. But so people do need to do the reading and know the history and understand the international history. But, also struggle, because that's going to give you, it's going to make all that stuff you're reading about understandable in a way you can relate to. You can take your own experiences and see how other historical experiences were the same or different from what you're experiencing. It just kind of grounds it for you in reality. And that, that's when you can bring your own insight to it. So there's a comment, I believe that talking about MMT and using U.S. Currency to kind of manipulate the global markets depends on the dollar staying as the world's reserve currency, which depends on continuing U.S. imperialism. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, that's one of the things that the rival capitalist BRICS bloc is starting to say. Is after World War II, they just kind of decided that the dollar would be the world currency. And hey, that was decades ago. Maybe we should update that to reflect the needs of other would-be exploiters who also want to get in on that, and they resent the U.S. being the center of all decisions and everything all the time. They're like, we're major players, we're showing up, we're big exploiters, we can fuck you up, and we want our currency to be able to manipulate the world now. So, yeah, that's the kind of emerging fight coming up now. And there may be a shooting war over it, there may not be. I mean, there's already a front opening up with the Russia-Ukraine thing, and then Russia also in Western Africa. That's two areas where there's rivalry between the BRICS bloc and the US-NATO bloc. But again, I want to stress, don't think about these things in absolute terms. Yes, there is kind of this system of countries that have China as their main trading partner that's more in the BRICS realm, and that share some characteristics more in common with each other, like they're emerging markets rather than very established imperialist powers. And then on the other side, the EU countries and the US, they and other sort of, British Commonwealth, like Australia, Canada things, and Japan, of course, like G7 type stuff. Remember, the G7, though, used to be the G8 until fucking Russia got kicked out not very long ago. So, all the people who are like, oh, Russia's so different, they're anti-imperialist, they were in the club until 2014, which is when this current conflict really kicked off, and it was over, things like the annexation of, the whole Crimean area conflict that is now flaring up in the Ukraine thing. Anyway, what I was saying is, remember, this is one interconnected system. While there might be a sort of block of closely allied countries that have some characteristics more in common as capitalist countries than others that have been more long-term allies, they do all trade with each other. So, like, don't forget that. It's not like this absolute thing of, like, we only trade with these people. No, it's they primarily trade with those people, but there may be even some industries where they primarily trade with the other bloc. So remember, capitalists want more than anything else to maintain capitalism. Why? To make money. It's all about profit in the end. That's what they're in this for. And so, yeah, there's politics and there's struggle for exploiters to get a leg up on each other. But it's like the mob. It's like the mafia, where it's like, is there truly honor among thieves? It's a business. It's a business. At the end of the day, they're, kind of out for themselves. They're out to make money. But it does nobody good if they all go down. So, anyway. The difficult part, in my opinion, is squaring the bourgeoisie's infinite money printer with the drive for profit and the implementation of austerity. I'm going to address that comment again later, because we're near the end of the stream and I'm just getting a little worn out. You raise a good point. Bourgeois economists have to be acutely aware of which side their bread is buttered on. Their existence necessitates it. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Waiting for some idealized proletariat at an unspecified point in time is my main point of contention with Trots. They criticize revolution in the global periphery because they hold that the Euro-proletariat must wage revolution first. Well, yeah, I know what you're talking about. And they're already wrong, because literally the revolution that Trotsky participated in was on the periphery of its time. So there's that. But yeah, and to be clear to anyone either unintentionally or intentionally seeking to misconstrue what I was saying before, and I don't think that's you, but you have to assume these people are out there. What I was saying was not, let's wait for the entire world to get really developed in terms of capitalism and that the whole planet gets proletarianized. I'm just saying that would be a way in which Marx was not wrong, but also it didn't happen at the weak beginning of capitalism. It happened at the weak absolute fucking tail end of capitalism. And it would still occur on the way that Marx overall described, but just took a hell of a lot longer. So in that sense, Marx wouldn't have been wrong. Now, I think what Lenin and the Bolsheviks proved was that it didn't necessarily have to happen in the most advanced countries first. That if you organized sufficiently, you could beat the bourgeoisie at other stages of capitalism. So I think that is kind of what they showed, is that there are ways to do this right when the bourgeoisie is setting up, for example, and that's what happened in China, because really the Chinese communists started going right after the fall of feudalism. So it was kind of a Russia-like situation. It was like, they were fighting with the Kuomintang, the nationalists, who were capitalist. And that went on for several decades. And they basically, tricked the nationalists in a way, although, the nationalists arguably got some of the upper hand a bit later on, but within the context of being, quote, communist. But anyway, point being, a lot of the European countries, like Germany or whatever, sort of missed their shot at, it's like you got one shot, don't miss. Well, they missed. When the bourgeoisie were super weak, just setting up. It's like literally killing baby Hitler. If you don't, then there's just a long window of opportunity. That's not an absolute thing. It's just, where it's sort of most likely, or where the bourgeoisie is at their weakest. Can the proletariat defeat the bourgeoisie at their strongest? Theoretically, yes. Absolutely. But it would take a level of organizing that has never been accomplished before. So, if we sort of did the multiple Earths, like parallel universes thing, I'd be very curious to see how many versions of 19th and 20th century history actually saw a real early proletarian revolution. I would suspect it's on the lower side. And that, but it'd be interesting to see, at which windows of opportunity was capitalism most likely to be taken down. I think Marx was basically correct in saying, like, for example, I reference a lot the 1850 address to the Communist League. If you search on Marx on guns, it's where that under no pretext quote comes from. But in that, he describes like how as soon as the bourgeoisie starts setting up its government, freshly overthrowing feudalism, the proletariat should also set up workers' councils. Soviet means council, by the way, in Russian. And the workers should basically not give the bourgeoisie an inch to develop. As soon as they start setting up their bourgeois government, start setting up a parallel proletarian government, and see if you can take them. That's exactly what they did in Russia, and it worked. Problem is, a lot of the European countries missed that window, and then it was kind of too late. So then you're waiting for a major crash, a world war, some other major embarrassment and vulnerable point to exploit. So it's like, can you take down the bourgeoisie on its best day? I would assume there's a few worlds in which that was the case, And by the way, I'm just using this as a thought experiment, not trying to make a stand for like the multiverse or anything right now. I'm just saying, like, if you were to run this history many times, I'm sure that there's a few examples under somewhat unusual conditions, if history develops a little different, that, the proletariat could take down the bourgeoisie on its best day. Is it the most likely? No, it's probably the least likely. Again, because it's about relative strength. And to a certain extent, dumb luck, but mostly relative strength of who is organized and resourceful. But absolutely not trying to argue, waiting for it. People already, in the U.S., are way behind the level of organizing they already should be up to. I would like to see more agitation, education, and organizing, much, much more. But I think there is kind of mass education that needs to happen before that even really becomes possible. We got to get the struggle going and, break through a lot of this anti-communist propaganda. And you don't break through it by playing into it, as some of the ANCOMs do and other sort of opportunists. Like CPUSA shies away from talking about dictatorship of the proletariat. At least Joe Sims has made some statements about, he doesn't like that statement or whatever. And it's just like, you're never going to overcome this by kind of like playing to the fears that the bourgeoisie has instilled. You overcome it by overcoming it. Like I've been told many times, don't even say the word bourgeoisie. No, just say bourgeoisie or capitalist. Like, it's very easy to actually teach people what words mean. And I think the growth of this channel and other channels like it is evidence, like, no, actually people can learn. You don't have to treat them like cowardly idiots. And in fact, if you do treat them like cowardly idiots, you're tacitly sending the message that that's what they should be. It's kind of a value statement, an instruction, if you will. They may end up fulfilling it. So don't do that. Treat people like the people you would like them to be. Now, obviously, combine this with meeting them where they're at, but you can try to bring out the best in people is what I'm trying to say, rather than just reaffirming, their negative habits that are already established. Joe Manchin not seeking re-election. Who will Dems find now to be the blame for why they can't get anything done? Rotating villain. Who's up for it? Somebody else, some other Democrat is either just going to get elected, or they'll have some mental break and they'll just start becoming reactionary. And it's like, oh, well, we have to stick together as a party. Those poor Democrats. It's just like poor Israel. Poor Democrats. They have to keep serving capital and getting rich. Oh, must be hard. Operation Gladio never ended, and it applies to all of Europe. Same with Operation Condor in Latin America. Operation Condor, that's worth a boost, because I feel like a lot of people have heard more about Gladio by this point. I think the rebranding of fascism to make the average uninformed person to think it's just communism. Yeah, that's another thing. Is fascism to Americans is definitionally something that other countries and other people do, but definitionally it is not something that the U.S. can do. Or if there are people in the U.S. who can do fascism, it's the left. Just completely ahistorical, totally ignorant. We will have to deal with nuclear weapons sooner or later. The point of nuclear weapons is for revisionists to use it to beat down the working class, to not do revolution. And yeah, the Black Death did not end feudalism. It did weaken the feudal system. Accidentally clicked on your channel from recommended. This is cool. Well, welcome. There's also a YouTube channel. You can see on the graphic on the screen there, youtube.com/socialism for all. I think still works. Also at Socialism for All in YouTube's infinite wisdom, they decided to start putting @ symbols on things. But yeah, we do a SoundCloud and a Spotify and a YouTube. These live ones we record here and then we upload to those a few days later. But yeah, welcome. You can, if you ever wanted to learn Marxism, that's what we're trying to make accessible here. Fun fact, during the Cold War, the USSR built thousands of nuclear bomb shelters for the general public. Meanwhile, we Americans, all we got was duck and cover. Well, actually, no, we had privatized bomb shelters. People would build them. They weren't public. Yeah, it was typically associated with the far right. You would have to buy and construct a bomb shelter in your personal backyard. Very, very typical. It's as far as social imperialism versus regular imperialism, we have public bomb shelters, and then in the U.S. you have to buy your own. That's I never really thought about that. That's funny. Fear is a tool for crowd control. One Dime had a video on MMT. Yeah, I remember when that came out. MMT isn't sound and it's based in imperialism. I agree. Yeah. All right, what else we got here? I forgot that it was Henry goddamn Kissinger who was the one advising some restraint to Nixon regarding not nuking Vietnam. Imagine being told to tone it down from a ghoul like Kissinger. Well, Kissinger was just smart. Nixon was also in a political tailspin, and it was just what can I do to save face here? And, I know, commit fucking atrocities. Of course, show strength. Yeah, Kissinger was just playing the long game. I'm not going to do a Kissinger voice, but it's no, Richard, we must, we're trying to go here for vacation one day. Don't nuke it. I liked learning about MMT just to understand it, but I don't see how anyone could promote it as some sort of solution and claim to be a leftist of any sort. Well, this is the state of the broader U.S. left. Way too many sock dems, and yeah, we'll take this on at some point. I mean, we're talking about it now, but yeah. And I want to be clear, too, Social Democrats, reformists, whatever, listening to this, that you're not maybe Marxists right now. We do want to help you, we want to engage in dialogue and help you learn more about Marxism. A lot of us used to be like you, and then we learned more about the limits of social democracy and how it really doesn't work. And capitalism just keeps coming back. And there's just, kind of only one way to get rid of it, by actually getting rid of it, not through reform. Oh, yeah, and there is also a question about Marxists.org. So Marxists.org, the Marxist Internet Archive, MIA, where I like their things a lot because they're simple HTML and they're just really easy to download and keep copies of and all that kind of stuff. It's also for people who it doesn't use up a lot of data and they're very easy to read. So anyway, I like MIA a lot for that. They are Trotskyists, so the people who run it are Trotskyists. The entire site, I mean, they have many anti-Trotskyist things on their site, but wherever there's an editorial, it tends to be from more of like a Trotskyist bent. Anyway, Marxist Internet Archive was down or partially down for like several days. I think it's back up now. I don't know. It's like I was having some pages loading and some pages not loading, but I did see some Reddit threads about it. And so best wishes to MIA. I hope whatever's going on there is just some site maintenance, and seeing that someone added more readings by William Z. Foster. There were already a lot by William Z. Foster. Somebody added more to the MIA William Z. Foster archive. I will just also add Marxists.org is pretty well archived on the Internet Archive, web.archive.org. So, for example, I mentioned this before, but there are some Marx and Engels readings that you now get a copyright notice from because Lawrence and Wizart have instructed MIA to take some of the Marx and Engels writings down. Well, guess what? Head over to web.archive.org. You can find most of them. So, actually, I think all of the ones that I've looked for have been archived. So, all right, I'm going to leave it there, folks. This was a good chat. I appreciate you all coming. Very good contributions. No trolls that I saw. So either we got lucky or the mods did a great job. Either way, thank you, mods. And yeah, we're going to keep doing this on a weekly basis. These office hour streams are really working. And, as far as current event stuff, I'm putting that more in the community post. Want to remind people, we also are copying some of the community posts now over onto Medium, medium.com/@socialismforall. Also Substack, socialismforall.substack.com, for more of kind of blog posts. The written stuff is not something I've done prior to a few months ago, but I kept complaining about how the streams were kind of taking up too much time and all this and that. I found that splitting out some of the presentations into the written arena and then just doing the chat in the streams, that's been working much better. So anyway, thanks again to everybody for showing up and helping make the stream what it is, and we will see you in the next video.